In 2014, Legendary and Warner Bros. Collaborated to launch a humble film. Gareth Edwards' Godzilla was never intended to be the start of a cinematic universe. The movie was supposed to be a redemption for America in the eyes of Godzilla fans, and a chance to capitalize on cinema's greatest giant monster. The success of the movie opened the door to a potential Edwards-led trilogy that quickly bloomed into a crossover series with the collision course between Godzilla and King Kong. In 2014, Legendary had acquired the rights to King Kong, and started work on a pseudo-prequel to 2005's King Kong. By 2015, it was announced that things had changed. Godzilla vs. Kong was in development in the same universe as Godzilla 2014 and the upcoming Kong Skull Island, and with that, one of the most financially successful cinematic universes of all time was born. But is the MonsterVerse truly a successful storytelling vessel, or has it just done well at selling toys? Today, I'll share a compiled version of my MonsterVerse May reviews, in which I cover every entry in the MonsterVerse, from the comics to television shows and beyond, in chronological order. Today, we'll be reviewing every entry of the MonsterVerse released as of May 2024, starting with Godzilla Awakening and ending with Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. All this to determine how well the films work as a comprehensive universe, and to see if the MonsterVerse has truly earned its place as one of the best cinematic universes ever made. Spoiler alert, it has. There's a reason it's outlived so many MCU clones and competitors, and has done justice to the idea of a cinematic universe, which was popularized for today's era of filmmakers between the years of 1954 and 1975, as Godzilla and his rogues galleries of kaiju and mechanized friends and foes originally made records as the most successful cinematic universe and the second series to ever be considered a shared universe for decades to come. So today, please enjoy MonsterVerse May again, for the second time, because Warner Bros. Has been such a pain in the butt in the copyright department on the original compilation, forcing me to do this version. Please enjoy.
It's MonsterVerse May.
Godzilla Awakening is the prequel tie-in comic released alongside Godzilla 2014. Initially hitting shelves on May 7th, 2014, this comic has been the source of much debate ever since its debut. For a while, it seemed like Legendary and the MonsterVerse wanted to move on from this comic, completely ignoring its existence, but leading into the release of Godzilla King of the Monsters, the team over at Legendary Comics confirmed that it was still relevant to the broader MonsterVerse. 10 years later, Godzilla Awakening has seen a re-release as part of the Legends of the MonsterVerse, the Omnibus collection, that compiled all 5 original MonsterVerse comics into one. The term Legends in this title is particularly meaningful now with the release of Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, a series which details a radically different origin for the Monarch organization than what was depicted originally in this comic. While it is yet to be acknowledged specifically by Legendary, Godzilla Awakening can no longer be considered canon, and now serves as a fun alternate telling of the history of the MonsterVerse. The story starts out in 1980, where a young, nearly 40-year-old Ishiro Serizawa visits his father, Eiji Serizawa, toward the end of his life. Eiji reveals that shortly after Ishiro was born in 1945, their home was destroyed in the bombing of Hiroshima, which awakened a phantom-like creature called Shinomura and the King of the Monsters himself, Godzilla. Both creatures are drawn to the surface in search of radiation for sustenance after being in deep slumber for centuries. I really appreciate the attempt to place an emphasis on the devastating consequences of the atomic bomb, much like in the classic Godzilla films. Because the Titans in the MonsterVerse are creatures natural to this planet, their atomic origins had to be changed dramatically to fit this new universe. But Eiji's line about Shinomura being a monster summoned by our own monstrosity is a solid attempt to tie back into Godzilla's primary themes, even if it doesn't land as well as it could have. A year later, Eiji rescues a US soldier named Lee Shaw from a Shinomura attack and is recruited into the Monarch unit, a special task force in the United States government meant to study and eliminate Shinomura and any other Mutos they discover. Over the next few years, Monarch tracks Shinomura around the Pacific, Pacific, and EG uncovers evidence of a second creature, a larger monster a witness in Guam identifies as Gojira after local legends. EG becomes obsessed with discovering Gojira, creating a wedge between him and Monarch. Diverging from real-world events, the USS Nautilus is created in 1950 and launched as a way to awaken Godzilla to prove his existence. While the plan works, they gather no physical evidence to prove Godzilla is out there, creating an even further divide between EG and Monarch. Shaw and a scientist named Dr. Zamalek discover Shinomura is a hive-minded creature that can regenerate from a single cell. This culminates in the Army's decision to use a nuclear bomb to disintegrate Shinomura before it can grow more. They repurpose their Castle Bravo nuclear test into an attempt to lure Shinomura to Bikini Atoll to kill it. EG protests, having uncovered evidence that Godzilla is an ancient alpha predator, who is old rivals with Shinomura and exists to keep nature's balance by fighting creatures like Shinomura to the death. Godzilla has been doing so for 250 million years now. Deciding that Godzilla likely does exist and is an equal, if not bigger, threat to international security, General Douglas MacArthur gives the go-ahead to take them down. And so, both creatures are lured to Bikini Atoll in front of Monarch and the United States government and bombed. Despite seemingly working, EG remains certain that Godzilla survived the explosion, unlike Shinomura, and will one day appear when Ishiro is his age. 1 year later, in 1981, EG has passed away, and after honoring his father at his funeral, Ishiro is approached by Lee Shaw, who recruits him into Monarch at the ripe young age of 36. Godzilla Awakening is best appreciated as a standalone story outside the MonsterVerse, with heavy inspiration from the 2014 film. The comic doesn't answer any meaningful questions and is riddled with continuity errors, both to the broader MonsterVerse and to the 2014 film. Things like Ken Watanabe's Ishiro Serizawa being deep into his 70s during the events of Godzilla King of the Monsters as a result of his 1945 birth date have never sat right with me, especially when you consider that Watanabe was only 57 when he filmed that movie, and the alterations made both to the USS Nautilus and the Castle Bravo bombing didn't align with the 2014 film even remotely. With the addition of Monarch Legacy of Monsters to the MonsterVerse completely wiping out the storyline about Godzilla tracking Shinomura through the South Pacific pre-1954, Shinomura's existence never being mentioned or seen, and Lee Shaw being transformed into a completely different character who joins Monarch in 1952 rather than 1946, and is never seen having any affiliation with E.G. Serizawa, this comic's events can't be taken as anything more than a fun companion piece inspired by the MonsterVerse, and there's nothing wrong with that. Godzilla Awakening is a very mixed bag. At times, the storytelling is pretty engaging, with an intriguing plotline and interesting world building, while at other times it gets dragged down by its generally unlikable characters and has story reveals that are hard to follow. The artwork follows a similar trend, with a strong and interesting style that is always visually striking to look at, but is often really hard to interpret. There are a lot of visual questions raised by the art regarding characters' ages, the Japanese cast being drawn to look very white, and action that is often incoherent and confusing. One page depicts sailboats existing 250 million years ago, Shinomura eating what looks like a giant monster that we've never seen before, unless it's the giant shrimp-like creature we see in Monarch's museum, but that connection's never made clear, and Godzilla transforming himself into an island on all fours with proportions that seem to match Methuselah's rather than Godzilla's himself. A few pages later, Godzilla appears to be flying through the air, heading face first into the ground. Characters flying during action sequences is a common trend for this comic, where every single intense moment is punctuated by nothing but question marks as to what is happening on the page. As long as Awakening is viewed as its own self-contained legend about the origins of Monarch, while keeping in mind that all but none of it actually happened within the context of the MonsterVerse, this is a decent read. The story can be very sloppy, and the art is expressive and stylistic while being overly convoluted and muddled at times. But the broader story beats actually make for a very decent narrative. They just aren't executed to their potential, which is why retconning this comic into oblivion with later installments in the MonsterVerse is actually a welcomed change. I actually really love some of the elements in this comic, such as Shinomura, who is essentially the MonsterVerse's take on Ghidorah, but with a more ghost-like spin, which is very awesome, while other elements don't quite land as well as they could. It's clear reading this story that Awakening is a very rushed product, with limited quality control. A problem that unfortunately never goes away with the MonsterVerse comics is Legendary's rush to release them alongside the films, resulting in needless continuity errors and limited relevance to the films themselves, and that has never been more prominent than it was here. I might recommend Godzilla Awakening to hardcore MonsterVerse fans, but if you're not as deep into these films as you could be, this is a skip for sure. It doesn't have any broader implications for the universe and has been completely deleted from relevance. The interesting story beats seen here are almost all done better in the later Monarch Legacy of Monsters, and even as a Godzilla standalone story, this leaves a lot to be desired. formed. 2017's Kong Skull Island is in many ways the formal start to the MonsterVerse. While 2014's Godzilla was the first film released, it was made as a standalone movie with the hopes of becoming a trilogy. But upon the film's success and Legendary's recent acquisition of a pseudo-prequel script to Peter Jackson's King Kong, the idea for the MonsterVerse was formed, and with the addition of director Jordan Vogt-Roberts and Godzilla 2014 writer Max Bornstein stepping in alongside a few other writers, the cinematic universe as we know it was born. Under the guidance of Vogt-Roberts, the film was transformed into a 1970s period piece that is equal parts Apocalypse Now, Shadow of the Colossus, and of course, King Kong. The story begins in 1944, when two soldiers, one from the United States and one from Japan, crash land on a remote island where they soon encounter Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. We then arrive in 1973, where we find the MonsterVerse's main tether, the Monarch organization, on the brinks of collapse. In a desperate attempt to prove that monsters exist as a way to save their organization, Bill Randa and Houston Brooks are able to convince a senator to allow them an expedition to the recently discovered via satellite Skull Island. Anticipating the danger that awaits them, Randa arranges for them to have a military escort under the lead of Colonel Packard, and recruits James Conrad, a former captain of the SAS, as a tracker to help them in case things go wrong. Finally, a reporter named Mason Weaver joins the expedition alongside Landsat, and we are off to Skull Island. After traveling through the intense storm system that has surrounded Skull Island for centuries, the Sky Devils begin to drop explosives that act as seismic charges, allowing Monarch to discover that the island sits atop a hollowed pocket of Earth. Responding to the damage being caused, and in order to protect the island, King Kong appears and wipes out the helicopters in one of the most energetic and well-executed action sequences in the entire MonsterVerse. In the aftermath, the survivors find themselves separated and stranded on the island, all united by the goal to reach the northern point in 3 days so they can make their planned extraction. Along their journey, they discover that danger lurks around every corner as they encounter a series of monsters in all shapes, sizes, and levels of danger. Eventually, the group led by Conrad encounters a tribe of natives called the Iwi and are introduced to Hank Marlowe, the US soldier who was stranded on the island during World War II and who has lived with the Iwi for nearly 30 years. Conrad's crew learns that Kong is the king of the island and is actually a protective force for good, who keeps nature's balance and protects the island from the invasive skullcrawler species that lives below. Packard's men reunite with Conrad's and they head out in search of a lost soldier named Jack Chapman, whose helicopter has enough weaponry for Packard to kill Kong. This leads them to a boneyard, where they're attacked by the skullcrawler that killed Chapman. Packard's intentions to kill Kong cause a divide between the groups. His soldiers lay a trap for Kong, leading into a fearsome showdown. But before Packard can kill Kong, Conrad, Weaver, and Marlowe stop the soldiers and de-escalate the situation, only to be interrupted by the big one, the massive skullcrawler who killed Kong's parents and who is considered the devil of the island. The Skull Devil sends the men running for safety as Kong kills Packard, kicking off the final battle, where the Skull Devil hunts the humans and battles Kong to the death in a brilliant action sequence full of exciting twists and turns, a wonderful integration of the humans into the danger, and intense and emotional beats that round out what is one of the best kaiju fight scenes ever put to film. Kong's rapid, efficient, and intelligent fighting style is contrasted against the speed, agility, and power of the Skullcrawlers. The human cast is able to serve both as obstacles in the final battle and opponents in it, turning the tides of war during crucial moments. Eventually, Kong gains the upper hand and pulls off a top 2 MonsterVerse finisher move with the iconic deboweling of the Skull Devil, saving the day and allowing the survivors to return home. This leads into a beautiful epilogue where Marlowe is reunited with his family, and then a post-credits stinger, setting up the upcoming war between Godzilla, King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan. Kong Skull Island is by all filmmaking standards the absolute peak of the MonsterVerse. Vogt-Roberts' commitment to location shooting across Australia, Hawaii, and most importantly, Vietnam lead to one of the most beautiful, visually rich, and awe-inspiring blockbuster films ever made. The incredible cinematography by Larry Fong, brilliant color palette, fantastic art direction, incredible action choreography, inventive monsters and scares, genuine sense of stakes and tension, and electric music, both licensed and composed by the legendary Henry Jackman, build out my favorite film of the decade. The A-list cast all deliver memorable memorable and nuanced performances with both compelling leads and, at times, an even more scene-stealing and heartfelt sidecast. The simple story that slowly narrows in scale over time as we learn about the island, the threats that lie below, and focus in on the emotional core of Hank Marlowe's story moves with an efficiency and grace that most films struggle to achieve, while still allowing for truly emotional moments and reveals. Packard's war against Kong is exciting and engaging in ways the MonsterVerse often struggles to achieve with its human casts, and contrasts wonderfully with the heart of the film. Hank Marlowe's simple desire to allow the island's natural balance to maintain itself and to return home to his family. The authentic sense of stakes created through effectively timed kills and creature reveals allows the audience to truly engage in the characters' stories on a level that many other films don't achieve. The location filming adds a level of authenticity to the movie and grounds the film in a real environment that helps to build out the sense of scale for the creatures and characters. It leads to the cast being sweaty, dirty, and often wet in ways that aren't easily replicated in studios, creating a tangibility to the film that aids its sense of scale and tension when the monsters eventually do turn up. Despite featuring the smallest titan in the MonsterVerse, surrounded by even smaller super species, the legitimacy this movie has built through its locations, set design, and stakes, all helped through wonderful cinematography and framing, make the monsters in this film feel larger than they ever will again in subsequent MonsterVerse releases. Despite being the true jumping off point for the now booming cinematic universe, Kong Skull Island is never bogged down in the weight of having to carry a franchise on its back. The film introduces some general retcons and lore reveals that help to flesh out the broader MonsterVerse, but that never distracts from the central goal to tell a fantastic self-contained story. Kong Skull Island is a film that is firing on all cylinders. It is dynamic and exciting while also being emotionally rich and engaging. The film is full of exciting Easter eggs, wonderful world building, and thematic weight that help to support it on rewatches. The rewatchability is also helped by the amazing pacing and lively cast. Kong Skull Island is incredibly directed and shot with both a compelling human story and an amazing kaiju story. Kong is an instant favorite, with a mystery and intrigue surrounding him that is peeled back just enough for us to see him as the wonderfully lonely, fearsome, and caring creature he is underneath it all. Of all of the MonsterVerse films, this one creates a balance between preserving the Titans' godlike status and mystery while giving them genuine characterizations better than any other film. This film is topped with amazing special effects and a soundtrack that is thrilling and memorable. I will never forget the exhilarating feeling of watching this film in IMAX for the first time, and I expect that Kong Skull Island will retain its spot as my favorite film in the MonsterVerse for years to come. If we are to define the MonsterVerse by similar phases to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong brought Phase 1 to an end. The unified story the MonsterVerse had been telling from entry to entry that was slowly and ominously barreling towards the Clash of the Titans finally came to pass. But due to the ongoing success of the franchise, Legendary wanted to see it continue. While a few projects that were already in the works, such as what became Monarch Legacy of Monsters, were shuffled around and transformed into their final iteration, one project quietly moved through the stages of production until it was released almost without notice. This small-scaled adventure was Skull Island, an animated series that serves as something of a distant sequel to 2017's Kong Skull Island and can be considered the official start to Phase 2 of the MonsterVerse. The story begins in summer of 1992 or 1993. Small-time independent monster hunters Hero and Cap, along with their kids Mike and Charlie, sail the world in search of a strange luminescent dragon that Cap saw decades earlier. Their goal of trying to prove that monsters exist isn't a very lucrative one, leading Hero and Mike to make a deal with a woman named Irene to find an island she's been searching for. This brings them to an old GI who warns them about Skull Island, an island his squadron was brought to in the early 1970s, only to all perish at the hands of horrible creatures that they were warned to never again speak of. The GI sells them a chart that should bring them to where the island is, and they're off. As they approach, they rescue a young girl, Annie, from the ocean after she fled a ship full of armed guards who are after her. The ship soon disappears in a storm, and the Once Upon a Maritime is sunk by a sea monster who kills Hero and most of the crew, leaving the survivors shipwrecked on Skull Island. The next morning, Mike and Charlie unite with Annie, while Cap meets Irene, who he follows to a camp of armed guards. Following a series of misunderstandings, Charlie and Mike are chased by a croc monster until Kong appears and eats it. The boys reunite with Annie, who now rides a dog monster she bonded with over the 10-year period she was stranded on a second, unknown but far less hostile Monster Island. Cap and Irene encounter a giant hawk monster, and Irene sets up a trap for Annie that gets Dog captured by Hawk and taken taken far away so that they can secure her without being killed by her pet monster. The plan works, but ends with Charlie being captured by the Hawk as well and taken to a massive temple where Kong lives. Charlie and Dog make their way back to camp while Mike falls ill from poison left in his system by the sea monster. Irene then reveals that she's Annie's mother and has spared no expense hiring people to search for her daughter. A pack of Nightboy gremlins attack and Dog and Irene's soldiers save the day, leading to a big reunion. Realizing that there's no way off the island without killing the sea monster, Charlie forms a plan to trick Kong into battling the creature to the death. In a flashback episode, we learn that shortly after the events of Kong Skull Island, Kong and his friend, a Spanish native who lives with a tribe on a beach, used to go on many adventures together. The two had an incredibly close connection, as does Kong with the Hawk creature, who brings Kong tributes for food. One day, Kong and Hawk discover a camp of killer chameleons. Despite the natives' protests, Kong attacks the lizards, drawing their attention to the girl and leading to an intense battle. Kong and Hawk barely save the native, causing her to lash out at Kong, leaving him behind. That night, while healing his wounds, Kong's blood awakens the Kraken, the sea monster that lives off the coast of Skull Island. The Kraken attacks and kills the tribe, including Kong's friend. Kong takes her necklace as a way to honor her and places it in his temple, where it sits for decades. Back in the 90s, Charlie and Annie ride Dog into Kong's temple, where they steal his necklace and lure him to the beach where the Kraken is hiding. Charlie is separated from Annie and captured by the iwi from Kong Skull Island, who reprimand him using the English they learned from Hank Marlowe for what he's done to Kong. This causes Cap and a very sick Mike to wander into the woods in search of Charlie, where they are attacked by a giant centipede that they have to fight off. Mike collapses and Cap carries him into the woods. Kong chases Annie to the beach and is attacked by the Kraken, kicking off an epic and extended final battle that lasts for nearly 10 minutes. Now fully revealed to be a Lovecraftian creature, the Kraken and Kong have an ever-evolving fight that takes Kong to the ocean floor in his first canonical undersea fight. Using his speed and skill as a fighter, Kong defeats the Kraken and then tears it in half to ensure its death, throwing its body to the shoreline. The Kraken's body crashes down in the ocean, causing a tidal wave to wash away everyone on the shoreline, and results in Annie cracking her head on a rock, making her pass out for 2 weeks. When she comes to, she's in a hospital with her mother. The underlying implication is that they were the only two to escape the island. With no guarantee of a season 2 and an ever-growing ominous silence from Netflix, it seems this is where the journey will come to an end. All viewers have now is an incredibly rushed and abrupt cliffhanger that leaves them with more questions than answers. What happened to the remaining survivors? Is Mike alive? What does Sam mean when he says he knows exactly what it's like to see his kid attacked by a monster? What happened to Charlie and the iwi? Did Dog drown? Who were Irene's men and why were they harvesting organisms on Skull Island? What was the strange pit that supposedly makes you sick? Why did Irene know about Hollow Earth? What Titan did Cap see all those years ago? And what is the deal with Annie's second Monster Island and how many other Monster Islands exist? All we know so far is that Season 2 wasn't going to connect to the Godzilla side of the universe in any way. There would be no Monarch or Apex. There would be no Godzilla or any of the Titans from his side of the universe. The story would follow Kong, poisoned by the Kraken, having to take on a brand new threat multiple times throughout the season, which deals entirely with the Hollow Earth without ever actually taking us to it. The Skull Island anime is a strange experiment for the MonsterVerse that, from all looks of things, didn't work out as they were intended. Seeking to gain a new audience on Netflix with the show aimed at teens, the show released without much fanfare or buzz. The most unfortunate part is, the show's actually pretty decent. Initially pitched as a prequel to Kong Skull Island, the series was moved to after the events of that film and before the events of the sequel comic Skull Island: The Birth of Kong. This is a decent setting for the show, as it allows them to tell fresh stories with King Kong and Skull Island while keeping them semi-modern but not bumping into established canon. As a King Kong adventure, Skull Island is actually a pretty good time. The show moves at a deliberate pace that is fairly slow for an animated series, but isn't so slow that it feels bogged down by filler. The only episodes that should have been condensed are episodes 3 and 4, which spend too much time rehashing the same college drama, developing the relationship between the kids too slowly, and having conflicts that don't support their own episodes. Other than these 2 episodes, which are still mostly good, the series moves at a fantastic pace that feels both cinematic and perfect for TV. The character writing is this show's strong suit, with all of the characters having interesting and defined personalities. The interpersonal conflict and human drama and emotional beats really resonate. It's impressive how dedicated the show is to getting the audience invested in the human story. This grounds the series with a sense of stakes that is enhanced by the series continuing the sense of danger lurking around every corner started in Kong Skull Island. This is a wonderfully fleshed out ecosystem of new monsters and super species that are constantly revealing themselves. While some monsters like the killer chameleons are too alike their real world counterparts to be all that exciting, other creatures like the aloe yellow turtle, night boys, rock bugs, and vine snakes feel perfectly integrated into Skull Island's flora-fauna ecosystem. The Kraken is a cool monster as well, creating interesting challenges for Kong to overcome. The Kraken's many tentacles and tendrils outnumber Kong. The Kraken's sheer size makes it easy for the creature to overwhelm him. Its electric shock abilities and ability to breathe underwater give it the advantage in battle. This forces Kong to be more creative and reliant on his skills and sheer strength to win the fight. This is also a unique fight in the MonsterVerse, in that it doesn't feature any human intervention to aid the heroic titan at all, making it even more satisfying when Kong's able to continue the MonsterVerse's trend of having a gruesome finisher move to the final opponent. Skull Island's biggest downfall and most unforgivable sin is its lack of attention to detail and, at times, genuinely horrible world building. While this show truly is a very fun King Kong adventure and is leaps and bounds the best animated King Kong project, it is a very poor entry to the MonsterVerse. Other than a few returning creatures, this show is almost entirely unconnected to that universe. The Iwi appear but are redesigned and recharacterized to be very different than how they appear in all other MonsterVerse entries, and other than a few throwaway references to the events of the 2017 film, such as a line about people flying in machines that visited the island, a downed sea stallion appearing, and a soldier who we never met before talking about the events of the 1973 expedition in a flashback, the series doesn't fit into the broader canon at all. From broad story strokes like Kong's radically altered characterization in his flashback episode to little details like the soldier giving an offhanded mention to the gray fox being the thing that got the 1973 survivors off the island rather than the 3 extract choppers the film implies saved them, this show gets so much wrong. Kong was seen living in Skull Mountain in the 2017 film as a lonely, reflective, and mature god. In this series, he has a different favorite mountain he sits on with his native friend, a preference towards a Spanish village rather than his distant presence with the Iwi, an enormous temple he lives in, and a hawk friend that scouts for him, aids him in battle, and feeds him. The flashback episode is truly the one that kills this entire show as an entry of the MonsterVerse, as it throws too much out the window and changes too much so that it doesn't fit into the universe at all. Kong's bond with the native undoes everything that was special about his connection to Gia. The fact Kong is friends with this native during the events of Kong Skull Island, a film that presents Kong as being so lonely that he tears up upon first contact with a human, and a movie that makes it clear Kong will not allow himself to get close to any humans, doesn't make any sense. Kong's ability to understand Spanish also feels incredibly out of place. This series takes Kong from being a mature and noble warrior and turns him into a prankster who will recklessly make decisions that jeopardize his human friend out of spite. The more you watch this series and the more MonsterVerse entries that are released since, the more it becomes clear that there is no guiding principle for phase 2 of this universe. There is no hand on the wheel making sure each entry is consistent in quality, story, canon, or even purpose at all. This show has other issues as well, such as its animation style and, at times, art design. The backgrounds and environments are so well detailed and beautiful that they contrast harshly with the simplistic characters who are often animated at different frame rates than their backgrounds during moving shots. This results in characters sliding around the screen in moments that feel awkward and cheap. The design for Kong and the Kraken also don't work. Kong looks nothing like his MonsterVerse self, aside from the scars, and the Kraken's mustache and Megamind head are distracting and laughable and again feel out of place in the broader MonsterVerse. Not to mention, the MonsterVerse already had an established Kraken Titan in the form of Nakika. This show also has a very hard time nailing down its sense of scale with Kong, especially in the flashback episode being drawn at times to be about the size of the classic 50-foot portrayal of the character rather than the 100 plus feet he was after Kong Skull Island. The only other real issues that weigh this series down as a whole are the repetitive dialogue that gets incredibly tired after a while and Annie and Dog's characterizations. While the fun banter can be quite charming, it can also become a burden for the series, wearing the viewer out with constant bickering, complaining, and arguing. And the plot twist reveal that the mercenaries were actually hired to protect Annie and were all massacred on a beach by Dog and Annie make them incredibly unlikable characters. Annie's bratty personality weighs her down throughout the entire series, and this reveal makes her nearly unjustifiable. Claiming she grew up on a monster island she doesn't know better doesn't excuse killing innocent people the second they show up, especially with how well adjusted she is outside that fact, and the fact that she spent 7 years in society before this. Finally, much like Kong, Dog is overhumanized to a suspension of disbelief breaking level. Even in a movie like Godzilla Kong the New Empire, which presents the great apes as more of people than gods, monsters, or even animals, Dog wouldn't work as is without some adjustments. Because this is supposed to be a part of the MonsterVerse, a dog Muto that is clearly able to understand English and is a human's pet doesn't work. And to say that because this is an animated project, the monsters need to be anthropomorphized more doesn't hold up when you look at series like Godzilla Singular Point, Neon Genesis Evangelion, or even the MonsterVerse comics. On On the whole, Skull Island is a pretty mixed bag. The show is a fun King Kong adventure with likable characters, fun monsters, and fantastic emotional beats. Moments like Kong's discovery of the destroyed village and his horror at the death of his friend are super well handled and effective. The soundtrack is wonderful, the shot composition and world are fantastic. The animation by Powerhouse Animations doesn't always hold up the way it's intended, but on the whole looks pretty good, especially the environments. This series is filled with memorable characters who are fun and engaging, with only a few missteps such as overemphasizing things like the college drama and overplaying Annie's personality to near unforgivable levels. The show presents a fun world of monsters who are just a little too humanized to fit into the rest of the MonsterVerse, which represents the show's biggest issue. This project does not work well in the context of the rest of the universe it's set in, and should be turned into a fun, non-canon adventure inspired by the MonsterVerse without affecting it, much like Godzilla Awakening. I really like the Skull Island anime, and I would love to see it continue for a second and final season. I wouldn't want to see it go on beyond that unless they make it clear it is a non-canon adventure, but this is still a fantastic King Kong story that can satisfy both hardcore Kong fans and fantasy adventure fans. While I wouldn't recommend this series to Godzilla fans or hardcore MonsterVerse fans who care about continuity, I would gladly shout this out to softcore MonsterVerse fans, King Kong fans, and fantasy adventure fans, especially ones who like animated media. While Godzilla Awakening was written by Greg and Max Bornstein, with Max Bornstein returning as writer from the original Godzilla 2014 screenplay, of which he based his script on, with art by Eric Battle, the entire creative team was swapped out when it came time to write Skull Island: The Birth of Kong. This sequel-prequel tie-in comic to 2017's Kong Skull Island was written by Arvid Nelson, who would go on to write Godzilla Aftershock as well. The art is now being done by the phenomenally talented Muhammad Yazid, aka Zid. This was also the only one of the MonsterVerse comics to be a monthly release, starting on April 12th and running to November 22nd, with a paperback being released on December 12th, 2017. Having learned countless lessons from Godzilla Awakening, Skull Island: The Birth of Kong is a truly well-crafted comic with close attention to detail and a deep love, admiration, and respect for the lore of the 2017 film and the MonsterVerse as a whole. In fact, this comic not only has a higher level of polish than any of the other MonsterVerse comic releases, but it also felt the biggest budget overall, getting a lot of fanfare around the time of its release, including a fully narrated trailer featuring Corey Hawkins returning as Houston Brooks. The story begins in 2012 when a naval ship responds to a Mayday signal that leads them to some mysterious wreckage where they pull out a sealed Monarch file. 2 weeks later, the file is delivered to a much older Houston Brooks, looking identical to Corey Hawkins, by an old associate. Brooks is able to access the encrypted files because Monarch can't allocate the resources to do it themselves as a result of the Muto and Gojira causing a massive radiation leak. It's then revealed that Houston had a son named Aaron Brooks with Dr. San Ling. Aaron went missing 17 years earlier while researching Muto fossils in the Antarctic, a subtle setup for Ghidorah's discovery by Monarch in the Antarctic years later. There are many small tributes to the broader MonsterVerse in this comic, including photos of Godzilla and Mothra in Brooks' office. We transition back to 1995 to see Houston and Aaron getting into a massive fight after Aaron's second-generation Monarch broke into his father's files to find out what was going on over his head. They begin an argument over Skull Island, with Aaron believing that Monarch needs a presence on the island to watch over Kong and to make sure that Kong can maintain nature's balance on the island. Houston is firmly against the idea, arguing that he and his friends worked for decades to keep the island a protected secret, fearing that its beauty would be destroyed by and its horrors unleashed upon the outside world. Aaron assembles a team of Monarch's youngest and finest to take a prototype Osprey to Skull Island to investigate for themselves. Upon arrival to the island, they're shot down by psycho vultures and then attacked by death jackals, which kill one of their party members. The gang is cornered in a cave and narrowly rescued by Kong and then some Iwi who offer them assistance. One of the Iwi, a child named Dato, speaks English. Hank Marlowe, the Sky Warrior, taught some of the Iwi English during his time on the island, which was passed down to some of their children. Ato takes the gang back to the Iwi village, where one of the men, Rikio, gets addicted to the Iwi's medicine and begins to have visions of Skull Island's past, influenced by the murals telling the history of the island. It's here we learn that for thousands of years the Kong species lived in peace on the island until the Skullcrawlers invaded from Hollow Earth, leading to a centuries-long war resulting in the mass slaughter of the Kong species. Rikio becomes obsessed with Iwi culture and having a religious communion with Kong, leading to an expedition inland that uncovers a Dutch East Indies ship from hundreds of years ago. They discover the Iwi are made up of stranded cultures from all around the world that have homogenized into a single peaceful society. society after being put through the extreme pressures of nature. Rikyo has another vision to the arrival of the iwi on the island, where it's revealed by the time they landed that the Kongs had already been dwindled down to just the two strongest, a male and a female who were the peak of their species. Following an attack by a siren jaw, the gang discovers a downed 1973 helicopter with functional weapons still in it. Rescued once again by Kong, the gang has to escape as a feeding frenzy begins, and they encounter different types of monsters. Desperate to get off the island, they make radio contact with the Osprey pilot and head his way for an evacuation. To do so, they travel through the Boneyard and avoid the skullcrawlers lurking within by hiding in a cave, where Rikyo has another vision to the past, revealing that the Boneyard was the original Kong Den and was overrun by skull devils. During a brutal fight, Kong's mother gave birth to him and hid him inside the cave. Kong watched as they fought to the death, taking out all the skull devils except the big one from 1973, sacrificing their lives in the process. It was this brutal and terrifying first glimpse of the world that gave Kong his anger and birthed his alpha titan instincts, resulting in him becoming the most powerful member of his species. Just as the gang is about to evacuate the island, Rikyo loses his mind and shoots down the Osprey using weapons recovered from the 1973 crew, turning on his companions and opening fire on them. The survivors escape a death jackal attack and return to the iwi village, but it's too late. Rikyo is close behind them and explodes a portion of the iwi wall, allowing a swarm of mother longlegs to invade the village, killing dozens of iwi and the rest of Aaron's crew. Rikyo believes this is the only way to determine if Kong is a benevolent god or a vengeful one. If he saves them, then they are worthy of his praise. If he doesn't, then they never deserved his protection in the first place. Kong does appear, first doing battle with a Queen Mother Longlegs and then taking out her swarm before turning his attention to Rikyo and killing him as a punishment for attacking the village. Kong then makes peaceful contact with Aaron and the iwi survivors and protects them as they repair the village. Finally, the iwi help Aaron create a transport for his message to his father that they send out to sea in hopes it will reach the mainland. 17 years later, we see Houston Brooks at his retirement party deciding it's not his time to leave Monarch after all, and that he'll be returning to Skull Island to rescue his son. According to the rest of the expanded canon, that's exactly what he does, leading to the foundation of Monarch's first full-time Skull Island base in 2012. Skull Island: The Birth of Kong is the best of the expanded MonsterVerse content. With no studio rush to release this comic before or at the same time the film came out, this comic expands the lore and world of the MonsterVerse in ways that are natural, loving, and with intent. Unlike the Skull Island animated series, rather than creating continuity errors or strange occurrences that the films ignore, this nearly self-contained adventure captures the majesty, danger, and adventure seen in Kong Skull Island and translates it to the written page with inspiring artwork by Zid. Of the MonsterVerse comic artists, Zid is the only one who has been able to accurately recreate the aesthetic, environments, and nearly photorealistic portrayals of the world he's bringing onto the page. The characters are all rendered incredibly well, managing to be expressive and animated while maintaining a sense of realism. The environments are so faithfully recreated that the sense of geography presented in the 2017 film is completely intact, with many returning locations and small details populating the backgrounds. This comic is easy to follow with an exciting story, a great cast of characters, intense action, wonderful world building and lore, and artwork that never leaves the reader confused as to what is happening. By every standard, this is the best of the MonsterVerse comics, perfectly adding to and blending within the MonsterVerse. It's unfortunate that the studio mandates that led to Godzilla Awakening feeling like such a rushed, tacked on, and disingenuous addition to the MonsterVerse would wind up plaguing the following comic entries. This comic proved that these stories do have a place and can add value to the broader cinematic universe at hand when given proper care. Not only is Skull Island: The Birth of Kong a fantastic addition to the MonsterVerse, but it's a fantastic expansion to the King Kong mythos that I cannot recommend more. A few years after Toho wrapped their Millennium series of Godzilla films in 2004, Legendary Pictures acquired the rights to Godzilla and slowly moved forward with the production of a new film. In 2011, Gareth Edwards was locked as the film's director. He had a genuine love and passion for Toho's Godzilla films and a desire to set things straight after America's disastrous attempt to make a Godzilla movie in 1998. His reimagining of the character was equal parts faithful to the Japanese original and innovative for modern audiences, with a goal to prove that Godzilla doesn't have to be a silly franchise aimed at kids or a cheap Jurassic Park clone. Edwards set off on a mission to make a serious and sophisticated movie grounded in reality starring the God of Destruction. The story begins in 1954 with the mysterious Monarch organization hunting down Godzilla across the Pacific, where they use nuclear bombs against him. In 1999, Monarch, under the lead of Dr. Serizawa responds to a strip mine collapse in the Philippines, revealing the enormous bones of a previous member of Godzilla's species. Inside the bones are two parasitic spores, one that is dormant and one that is freshly hatched, releasing a creature with a direct collision course to a nuclear power plant in Gojira, Japan. Joe Brody, a nuclear physicist working for the power plant, sends his wife Sandra to the lower levels of the facility to investigate the strange readings he's been picking up since the Philippines disaster. The plant is attacked, killing Sandra and bringing the entire building down. Later, in the year 2014, Joe and Sandra's son, Ford Brody, returns home to San Francisco after being deployed overseas as an EOD technician for the US Navy. His brief reunion with his wife Elle and his son Sam is brought to an end as he's forced to leave for Japan to bail Joe out of jail. Despite seeming like a deranged conspiracy theorist, Joe convinces Ford that a second disaster is about to occur. They return to the Q zone around Gojira to get Joe's old data to warn people about what's coming, getting arrested in the process. They're taken to a power plant, which now contains an enormous cocoon. Dr. Serizawa and his assistant Dr. Graham listen to Joe's warnings, but it's too late. The cocoon hatches, releasing a strange insect-like kaiju upon the world. The winged creature causes havoc, killing dozens of people, including Joe, and releasing a series of EMP attacks which cripple Monarch's defenses. The Muto takes flight, escaping into the darkness. The US military takes command over the situation, and Ford is briefed on Monarch, the Mutos, and an ancient apex predator called Godzilla. Serizawa believes he will awaken and restore nature's balance by killing the Muto if they can't stop it. Using the brief information he learned from his father, Ford reveals that the Muto was communicating with something unknown. The Muto then appears in Hawaii, where its rampage is cut short as Godzilla approaches from the sea, accidentally unleashing a tsunami upon the coast. Godzilla fails to kill the Muto, which escaped after the two destroyed Honolulu. Then a second Muto, the one from the dormant spore discovered in the Philippines, appears near Las Vegas, destroying the city and beelining towards the other kaiju. After learning all three creatures are on a direct collision course to San Francisco, the military devises a plan to lure them out to sea using nuclear weapons, where they'll detonate the bombs in hopes of killing the kaiju. The transport train for the nukes is attacked by the female Muto, who kills everyone but Ford and eats all but one of the bombs. Godzilla appears near the Golden Gate Bridge and is attacked by the military, causing him to lash out, tearing his way through the bridge. The male Muto then arrives, stealing the final nuke, which has been installed with a timer to detonate in an hour and 30 minutes. The male delivers the bomb to the female and the two build a nest in the city. The military sends Ford and a small team of soldiers into the battlegrounds using a halo insertion. Their goal of securing the bomb is made more complicated with the arrival of Godzilla, who appears to combat the Mutos before they can reproduce. As Godzilla battles the Mutos, the soldiers steal the bomb, taking it to the coast where they can sail it out to sea, allowing it to detonate a safe distance from the city. The Mutos gain the upper hand, only to have their victory spoiled by Ford, who blows up their nest, killing their eggs. Godzilla returns the favor, saving Ford by unleashing his atomic breath and turning the tides of war. Godzilla then battles the male Muto, as the female Muto makes a rush to the pier to retrieve the nuke and get revenge upon the soldiers. Godzilla uses his tail to strike the male Muto into a building, impaling and killing it. Ford attempts to take the nuke out to sea, but the Muto stops him, only to be attacked by Godzilla, who pries her jaws open and unleashes his atomic breath down her throat, decapitating her and saving the day. Ford is then saved by the military and the bomb detonates a safe distance away from the city. The next morning, Ford and Sam are reunited with Elle as Godzilla awakens and returns to sea. Godzilla 2014 is the ultimate redemption story. The film was handled with incredible care and attention to detail. It was critically praised and did the impossible, redeeming America from Godzilla 1998's reputation and proving Godzilla's potential, not just as a cartoonish superhero, but as a grounded star in well-made serious movies. Godzilla 2014 is a fantastic disaster flick and wonderful monster movie. Out of all of the MonsterVerse entries, Godzilla has a level of simplicity that lets the film shine. Following the straightforward story of a man attempting to return home to save his family during a monster attack, the movie's strengths are its confidence and commitment to its premise. The dedication to tell a grounded story set in the real world is pulled off wonderfully. Edwards spends the first hour of the film grounding viewers in a world of misinformation and secrecy. Because of this, the monsters feel even more mysterious, mythical, and godlike. This is aided by fantastic art direction. The settings and environments feel incredibly tangible. The large-scaled sets, such as the Q-Zone in Gojira, the USS Saratoga, and the destroyed streets of San Francisco, never once appear as anything other than pure reality. Despite being one of the lower-budget MonsterVerse films, this movie feels largest because of the extreme attention to detail put into its aesthetic. Every set in this movie is filled with wonderful touches, such as Joe's apartment tracing the history of Monarch, or the streets of Gojira filled with dust, leaves, and overgrowth. The monsters are also incredibly designed, arguably the best of the universe. The Mutos are alien and horrifying while also feeling realistic and plausible. Meanwhile, Godzilla features one of his best redesigns of all time, coming across both as the classic Godzilla and as a real functioning creature that could exist in the world we live in. All of this is supported through beautiful cinematography, lighting, and coloring. Because of this, Godzilla 2014 feels the most honest out of any of the MonsterVerse films. Godzilla also has a well-earned legacy for presenting scale on a level never before achieved in a Godzilla film and never again recaptured by any subsequent sequels. Gareth Edwards and cinematographer Seamus McGravy put special care into creating a size and weight to the creatures in this movie. Whether it be through obscuring the edges of the creatures, shooting them from the ground perspective, or always including a point of view reference for their size, small tricks were used throughout this movie to build up the magnitude of these monsters, making them unforgettable. This movie isn't without its flaws. The strange decision to kill off the most compelling character in the movie 40 minutes in was a bold call that didn't work out. While Joe's death was shocking and did provide personal stakes for the movie, Bryan Cranston's unmatched performance left a void that couldn't be filled. Cranston gives his screen time his all, oozing nuance and captivating audiences. His sorrow, guilt, love, and passion leads to moments of deep pity or explosive rage that are unforgettable. Once Joe's out of the film, there isn't anything to carry that weight. Because Godzilla's plot is so simple, and due to the titular monster being used so sparingly, it needed deep and nuanced characters and themes to support it. Unfortunately, those needs are not met. Aaron Taylor Johnson's Ford Brody is paper thin. We never get a true understanding of who he is outside of the plot. We never get a sense of who he truly is when he's off the clock, and Johnson isn't allowed to show his charisma or range very often. And while this film has lots of lines about nature's balance or how bad nukes are, we never dive into the film's themes on a truly meaningful level, robbing it of all the thematic weight which certain Godzilla entries thrive upon. Godzilla 2014 had the honor of celebrating 60 years of the King of the Monsters by unintentionally kicking off one of the most successful cinematic universes in cinema history. While not perfect, Godzilla truly is a stellar film with memorable performances and incredible tension. This gives way to a story that harkens back to the Godzilla films of the mid-60s and early 70s, where Godzilla would often play a supporting character to his enemy monster, who would appear as a threatening protector of the planet. By all standards, Godzilla 2014 represents the absolute peak of this style of Godzilla filmmaking. The movie is a little on the slower end in terms of pacing, but presents a fantastic foundation to be fleshed out in later sequels. The movie is well written, with wonderful creatures and action set pieces. The slow build-up works to create a palpable atmosphere around Godzilla that is sustained throughout the entire movie, even when he's not on screen. It also makes every single appearance of the kaiju all the more memorable. Every second Godzilla is on screen comes across as even more important and unforgettable, and builds to instantly iconic moments like the phenomenal atomic breath reveal and Kiss of Death. With a solid human story, a mysterious and epic kaiju story, Godzilla 2014 is a great monster movie. The cinematography is wonderful, as is the film's sound design, which provided a new and iconic Godzilla roar, as well as the foundations for the sounds of Godzilla for the rest of this series. The music by Alexander Desplat is intense and moody, and complements the film's serious tone well. The movie's biggest issues are its lack of depth for its human cast, slow pacing, and unforgivable home release transfer. Somewhere along the line, the original color grading, which can now only be viewed through special features on subsequent MonsterVerse film releases, was destroyed. The resulting pitch black version of the movie presented on Blu-ray destroys the film's original realistic vibrance and beauty. The recent 4K release of the movie was a slight step up, but still required me to switch the settings on my TV to dynamic just to enjoy the movie. This, coupled with the blasphemous removal of Godzilla legacy actor Akira Takarada's final performance in the franchise, has left me and many fans crying out for a proper re-release of this movie on home media. One that restores the color grade to something visible and releases the deleted Takarada cameo, which was robbed from us before we ever got to see it. Even still, Godzilla 2014 is a fantastic monster movie and a wonderful addition to the Godzilla franchise. The movie was a worthy anniversary film and an amazing reboot that gave way to an even more amazing cinematic universe. The larger universe at hand did abandon the grounded realism this flagship film established, made even more apparent by rewatching these films in chronological order, outing Godzilla 2014 as this strange black sheep among its peers, and with no fault of its own, this movie is almost completely estranged from the MonsterVerse of today as a result. This makes it even more special, and lets Godzilla fans fans such as myself, who preferred more grounded films, appreciate it on different levels. This is a solid starting point for the MonsterVerse and is still one of my favorite Godzilla films to date. I would gladly recommend this movie to any MonsterVerse fan, Godzilla fan, and general fan of monster movies or science fiction thrillers. The hype for the MonsterVerse reached unprecedented levels leading into the release of 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters. One of the ways Legendary Pictures capitalized on this was through the release of Godzilla Aftershock, a sequel comic to 2014's Godzilla and prequel to the upcoming picture. Godzilla Aftershock was written by Arvid Nelson, returning from Skull Island: The Birth of Kong. While Godzilla Awakening's cover artist Arthur Adams returned to provide the wonderful variant cover for Aftershock, this comic was illustrated by Drew Edward Johnson, who would become a staple of the MonsterVerse comics. Christopher Schei provided the hyper-realistic main cover for the comic, which was released only days ahead of Godzilla King of the Monsters. The story begins with a series of ancient artworks sketched on stone tablets in the 11th century BC, where a group of Phoenicians washed ashore in Japan, greeted by locals. They witnessed the emergence of a Godzilla-like creature called Dagon. Worshipping Dagon as their god, the humans lived in peace alongside the empathetic titan. One day, the ground erupted, releasing an enormous creature that defeated Dagon in battle, impaling him with parasitic eggs. Dagon survived and returned to sea, eventually succumbing to the parasites inside and dying in a cave. Just a couple of months after the events of Godzilla 2014, Alan Jonah is arrested and held for questioning in Guam. Just then, a massive Muto, resembling the one from the ancient tablets, erupts from the ground, pursued by Godzilla. Monarch investigates the aftermath of their fight, with Dr. Emma Russell taking lead. Emma learns that the US government has formed the San Francisco Commission to evaluate Monarch, sticking her with Miles Arthurton to observe. Emma is summoned to Japan, but before she can leave, Alan Jonah attacks, trying to take her hostage. Monarch Crisis Response member Tarkin fights Jonah, who escapes in the chaos. In Kyushu, Japan, Emma discovers that this was the source of a massive earthquake, which triggered aftershocks along the Pacific Rim, leading straight to Guam. It's the nest of the enormous Muto, which the Japanese called Jinshin Mushi. During their investigation, Tarkin discovers evidence of blast residue in the Muto's nest, suggesting it was potentially awakened by Jonah, who was unsurprised by its appearance in Guam. Meanwhile, Arthurton harasses Mark Russell, who reveals Emma is mentally unwell after their personal loss in San Francisco. Emma's team cracks Jonah's phone and discovers he has data on all of Monarch's outposts, titans, and activities. They also discover he's headed to an abandoned Monarch outpost in Siberia. As Jinshin Mushi appears at sea, destroying a submarine and fighting Godzilla, Emma's team arrives at another Muto nest in Siberia, which contains 2 hatched ancient eggs. Once again, Jonah appears, trying to take Emma hostage. Although he's apprehended by Monarch, his words resonate with her, as she starts to see that he views humanity as the monsters, whose recklessness has awakened the Titans. Jinshin Mushi attacks a nuclear plant in France, battling Godzilla and besting him once again. Godzilla barely repels the creature before it implants eggs in him. At Outpost 14 in the Philippines, built around the bones of the Godzilla-like creature discovered at the start of 2014's Godzilla, a Monarch briefing is given, revealing the new Titan is the mother of the Mutos from Godzilla 2014. The bones the Mutospores were discovered within were Dagon's. Emma theorizes that Muto Prime is either the result of a female Muto feasting upon her male partner after mating, or the final survivor of a Muto nest, hatching and battling all of its siblings to the death. Regardless, it's the prime version of the species and the end of the reproductive cycle, which continues when it implants its eggs in another member of Godzilla's species. The Siberian cave was another graveyard for a Godzilla-like creature and was presumably the birthplace for the current Muto Prime, a creature that has a high kill count against the Godzilla species, resulting in Godzilla being the last of his kind. Emma reveals that the Mutos are actually an invasive species that can terraform ecosystems in their liking when their nests hatch. They also release a sonic pulse that pacifies the Muto Prime by alerting her to their presence, ensuring their species' survival. With the death of the Mutos in San Francisco, the signal ended and the last remaining Muto Prime has risen to restart the cycle because there aren't any other male Mutos left to fertilize any nests that could be produced by the older female Muto, who later awakens during the events of Godzilla King of the Monsters. Emma comes up with a plan to reproduce that pacifying sound, so Jinshin Mushi can be killed by Godzilla, who isn't strong enough to last in another fight with her. Houston Brooks warns Emma that she's pushing herself too hard, but she ignores him, going through with her plan. The plan backfires as the sound causes Muto Prime to go on a rampage, killing almost everyone aiding Emma's task. Emma is summoned to a UN tribunal, which puts Monarch on blast for failing to contain yet another Muto. Muto. The UN opts to let them fight, in hopes it will kill Godzilla and that Muto Prime will hibernate again, with her eggs taking generations to hatch, making them all the future's problem. Disobeying orders, Miles helps Emma steal her prototype device called the Orca, which can tune into any animal's bioacoustics. Learning from her mistakes, Emma tracks Muto Prime to Montana, where it engages in a final battle with Godzilla. Godzilla is quickly overpowered. Muto Prime then releases a supersonic scream that shatters Godzilla's backspines, robbing him of his atomic breath. Emma uses the Orca to pacify the Muto before it can infect Godzilla, gaining him the upper hand and allowing him to channel his remaining atomic energy out of his shattered spines, creating his first nuclear pulse. Godzilla then kills Prime by stomping her head. Emma then returns to Boston, where she tells her daughter Madison that the two of them are going to stick together from then on, as big things are about to happen, which will change the world forever. Godzilla Aftershock is one of the better comic tie-ins to the MonsterVerse films. The storyline is very engaging and unfolds as an exciting mystery. Focusing the story on Emma is a fantastic way to tell a direct sequel to Godzilla 2014 while still setting up for Godzilla King of the Monsters. There are many factors that help Godzilla Aftershock feel like one of, if not the most legit and relevant MonsterVerse comics. Michael Dougherty, the director of Godzilla King of the Monsters, referencing the events of this comic on Twitter helped add a level of legitimacy to it that none of the other MonsterVerse comics ever had. Despite none of the films ever mentioning Godzilla's continued war with a third Muto across the globe just after the Battle of San Francisco, it is excusable and doesn't hold the comic back by much. Aftershock makes genuine attempts to be an expansion of not just Godzilla King of the Monsters, but the MonsterVerse as a whole, with many small details such as the inclusion of a much older James Conrad as a background member of Monarch, Houston Brooks returning and referencing the events of Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, the backstory for the bones in the Philippines, Dr. Chen appearing, the first implementation of the Orca, Emma's downfall starting, her first meeting with Alan Jonah, the development of the UN's disdain for Monarch, and way more. This comic truly goes the extra mile to tie things together. Most impressively, this comic made an honest attempt to tie into the Monarch timeline, which was used to promote Godzilla King of the Monsters starting in 2017. By expanding upon Jonah's story, he not only feels like more of a presence when he appears in King of the Monsters, but Aftershock uses him to fill in the mysterious mercenary and Siberian Mysteries entry on the Monarch timeline. It was this attention to detail and dedication to build the lore of the MonsterVerse that made Godzilla King of the Monsters such an event for fans and encouraged people to engage with the story as more than just a film series, but as a proper cinematic universe. The only misstep this comic truly makes in developing the lore for the MonsterVerse was including a skin of King Ghidorah frozen in ice 2 years before he would be discovered in canon. Aftershock isn't without its flaws. While the story is decent, this is the wordiest MonsterVerse comic ever written. Starting with Chapter 3, things get very convoluted as a massive exposition dump occurs in the Philippines. Due to an unknown contractual obligation with Toho, Dagon must be referred to as a Godzilla-like creature rather than one of Godzilla's species, leading to the comic creating unneeded ambiguity as to Godzilla's lineage. While promotional materials claim this is the story of how Godzilla wound up an endangered species, and the 2014 film already established Godzilla is one of many, this starts the trend of overcomplicating Godzilla's history to avoid contractual conflict. Additionally, the entire backstory for Muto Prime becomes overly complex, as we are given two separate and equally likely scenarios as to how Muto Prime can be born. The MonsterVerse would continue to do things like this, not committing fully to their ideas as a safety blanket to retcon things later if they came up with different ideas, starting the cracks in the foundations of continuity. Aftershock's artwork also leaves something to be desired. The art is simplistic and at times a little strange, with characters going off model or being drawn in very awkward ways. Godzilla's posing is often reused from panel to panel, making the action feel stiff and the artwork appear lazy. Lots of Godzilla's poses are pulled directly from films, figures, or promo assets, cheapening the entire book. As for Muto Prime, it is my least favorite MonsterVerse Titan design. It's overly complicated with too many limbs that serve no function. The creature barely resembles the Mutos that inspired it and has always felt very over-designed. Aside from these missteps, Godzilla Aftershock is still a worthy read, coming in towards the top of the list for my favorite MonsterVerse comics. The story is a well-thought-out expansion to the universe, with connections to every previous entry so far. It also enhances the experience of watching King of the Monsters in many ways. Most directly, this comic provides the reason for why Godzilla's spines change from film to film. Other than that, it develops Emma Russell's character, showing how unstable she was after San Francisco and sets up for her downfall. This is the story of her first meeting with Alan Jonah and reveals why she would go to him, as his words made sense to only her. With With loads of smaller setups for the next MonsterVerse film and lots of fun action, I highly recommend Godzilla Aftershock to all Godzilla and MonsterVerse fans looking to engage with the universe on a deeper level. The first proper live-action Godzilla television series was made in the form of Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, an Apple TV drama that aired weekly from November 17th, 2023 to December 12th, 2024. Originally in production with Godzilla King of the Monsters as Michael Dougherty and Zach Shields, the series was developed into a 10-episode drama by Chris Black and Matt Fraction alongside a series of writers, producers, and directors, including Matt Shackman, who directed the first 2 episodes and was an executive producer. Despite releasing nearly 10 years later, Monarch is the most direct follow-up to 2014's Godzilla out of the entire MonsterVerse. It also had the honor of reinventing Monarch's origins and presenting it for the first time in a live-action medium. The genius inclusion of Wyatt and Kurt Russell in the past and present role of Lee Shaw, along with a brand new origins for Monarch, erased Godzilla Awakening from canon, wiping out almost a decade's worth of continuity errors and setting the slate clean. The series is split between past and present, with dual storylines that play out simultaneously across most of the episodes. The narrative begins in 1952, as Lieutenant Lee Shaw is assigned an escort mission for Keiko Mira in the Philippines. Keiko and Shaw head into the jungle tracking radioactive isotopes. This leads them to Dr. William Randa, the younger version of John Goodman's character from Kong Skull Island, now played by Anders Holm. Randa works for an organization called Monarch, which was founded in 1946. After combining Keiko's data with Billy's myths, the 2 scientists stumble upon the USS Rodan, the ship that Billy was deployed upon in World War II that was attacked by an unknown Titan, leaving him as the only survivor and kickstarting the Monarch organization. Shaw saves the scientists as the ship is attacked by a dragon, proving that monsters exist. This leads to the formation of Monarch's core trio. Years later, in 1954, Monarch presents evidence of a massive creature to the US military, who retools a hydrogen bomb test into bait to lure the Titan out. The plan works, and Godzilla appears at Bikini Atoll. Despite Keiko's protests, the bomb is detonated and Godzilla is seemingly killed. In response, the US government expands Monarch into an international organization to discover more Titans. In 1955, Keiko and Billy head to Japan to meet with Dr. Suzuki, who creates a gamma simulator that can summon Titans. Shaw fails to meet with the US military about Monarch's budget requests, letting his feelings for Keiko get in the way, heading to Japan where they witness the return of Godzilla. Heading home, they discover that Monarch has been handed over to the US military as punishment. In a desperate attempt to save Monarch from its corrupt new military supervisor, Lieutenant Hatch, Bill and Keiko compile their findings into a map which locates all potential Titans. During this, Bill and Keiko's bond grows closer, becoming romantic after Bill learns of Keiko's son, Hiroshi, who was left without a father after he died years ago. Bill then discovers that the Titans live within the world itself. Shaw restores Monarch's independence after a meeting with General Puckett and warns him about Godzilla's survival, passing along Bill and Keiko's map in the process. To prove their theory, the trio travels to Kazakhstan in 1959, where they investigate a destroyed nuclear power plant. Their seismic charges reveal the bedrock has massive chambers within, warranting a deeper investigation that leads to a nest of eggs. The floor starts to collapse and the eggs hatch into an army of endoswarmers, which attack Keiko, dragging her into an endless pit, seemingly killing her. Doing their best to pick up the pieces, Billy and Shaw co-parent Hiroshi. In 1962, a portal is discovered in Kansas. Monarch and the military unite for Operation Hourglass, which sees Shaw and 3 others enter a containment pod. They use Dr. Suzuki's gamma simulator to bait a Titan out of the portal, stabilizing it and allowing Shaw's pod entry to the other side. The plan goes awry as the vortex destroys the testing facility. The government buries any evidence of Hollow Earth as a result, and Billy's obsession with proving he's right leads to Monarch's unstable position heading into the 1970s. Shaw and his men arrive in a strange realm between realms, getting hit with enormous amounts of static electricity and attacked by a Titan, resembling the Rodan dragon, now called the Ion Dragon. Apparently, a week later, Shaw, the sole survivor, is ejected from this realm and winds up in the year 1982, where he's held in Monarch containment and met by Hiroshi Randa. Fearing Shaw is radioactive, toxic, or insane because of whatever happened to him, Hiroshi banishes Shaw to Monarch's peaceful prison community called Secure Asset Management, where Shaw would be locked away until 2015. In 1973, Bill Randa escapes the attack by the Mother Longlegs on Skull Island, recording a message for Hiroshi and making his way to a beach, where he survives a battle between a second Mother Longlegs and a Mantle Claw. Randa ditches a bag full of his data into the ocean, where it would remain undiscovered until 2013. In 2014, Godzilla emerges during the event known as G-Day, where he battles the Mutos in San Francisco. During the evacuation of the city, Kate Randa leaves her girlfriend behind to chaperone a bus full of children. The bus gets destroyed on the Golden Gate Bridge by Godzilla, leaving Kate traumatized as one of the only survivors. In the year 2015, Kate arrives in Japan to settle family affairs after her father, Hiroshi Randa, seemingly passed away in a plane crash in Alaska. Kate discovers Hiroshi had a second family with the wife Emiko and son Kentaro. They discover Bill Randa's bag and take it to May, Kentaro's ex-girlfriend. They crack the files and learn about their family's legacy. This alerts Monarch to their activities. Pursued by the friendly agent Tim and his partner Duval, the trio runs to Lee Shaw, who escapes confinement and takes them to South Korea. They charter a flight with Shaw's friend Duho, taking them to Alaska, where they're attacked by the Frostvark. Following the tracks of Hiroshi, Kentaro discovers an old outpost and contacts help, rescuing Shaw, May, and Kate from the Titan. They're arrested by Monarch, who holds Lee Shaw for questioning and releases the others in hopes they'll unknowingly lead them to Hiroshi. The trio returns to San Francisco, aided by Kate's mother Caroline, where they discover a map leading them to Africa. Duval betrays Monarch, helping Shaw escape and revealing she's the sister of Sandra Brody, swearing to do anything in her power to prevent another G-Day. Uniting with the kids, the gang heads to Africa, where they find Hiroshi, alive, using a recreated gamma simulator to awaken a Titan. The Titan winds up being Godzilla, who appears beneath the gang's feet and takes down Tim's Monarch helicopter. Godzilla and Hiroshi disappear in the chaos. Shaw and Duval's mission to separate the surface world from the Titan's realm, making Godzilla's job of keeping nature's balance a lot easier, differs from the kids, who all wind up in conflict with each other as they learn that May has double-crossed them, Kentaro has turned on his father, and Kate is still in pursuit of Hiroshi for answers. May turns herself in to AET, an organization she launched a cyber attack against years before to destroy their research on neural links. Kate and Kentaro team with Tim to head to Washington to bail May out. Triggering a Titan warning system, Tim exposes Monarch to the public and they rescue May through a mysterious deal between Monarch and the organization, now revealed to be rebranding to Apex Cybernetics. Shaw closes a vortex in Alaska and then heads to Kazakhstan to close the next. The gang heads out after him, but fails to talk him down. Shaw detonates the portal, and in the chaos, May falls in, with Kate and Shaw going in after her. Believing them to be dead, Kentaro returns home and bumps into Hiroshi, who he confronts for answers. His father has been trying to prove the existence of a series of subterranean networks that connects the Titan's world to our own. Hiroshi believes this will get them one step closer to the key to coexistence with Titans. Monarch receives a signal from inside the vortex revealing someone is alive inside. Assistant Director Verdugo refuses to look into the signal, causing Tim to quit Monarch, teaming with Hiroshi and Kentaro. Inside the vortex, May and Shaw find themselves alive, searching for Kate. Shaw reveals his backstory and motives to May. Kate is rescued from a bramble boar attack by Keiko. For Keiko, it's only been about 1 month. After reuniting with May and Shaw, Keiko realizes how much time she's lost, revealing this realm, which she calls Axis Mundi, has some sort of time dilation properties. Keiko reveals she's been signaling the surface world using Dr. Suzuki's device, which was sent down with Shaw in the 1960s. They repair it and attach it to Shaw's original access pod and activate it, hoping to lure a Titan into Axis Mundi so they can follow its slipstream as it exits and make their way to the surface. They're attacked by the Ion Dragon, who is nesting near the pod. To ensure a second Titan appears through the portal, Shaw leaves the pod to secure its connection to the Gamma Simulator. The plan works and Godzilla appears to investigate. Godzilla is then attacked by the Ion Dragon, kicking off the MonsterVerse's fastest but one of its most entertaining final battles. Godzilla makes quick work of the Ion Dragon, throwing it through the portal, creating a slipstream to the surface. This sucks the pod in, with them having to leave Shaw behind. The pod surfaces at a strange facility in a storm. There, Kate, May, and Keiko reunite with Kentaro and Hiroshi. They then learn that Tim had to team with Apex to get them out of Axis Mundi, and that 2 years have passed, leaving them in 2018. A Titan responds to the portal activation, causing the facility to go on high alert. The season ends with the reveal that they are on Skull Island, with King Kong appearing to investigate. Monarch Legacy of Monsters is an incredibly ambitious swing for the Monsterverse. While mega fans like myself will always buy and read the comics, the films have shown no obligation to acknowledge or honor them in almost any way. While some small details were cherry-picked and included in Godzilla Godzilla x Kong, the comics overall are largely unimportant. But with Monarch, Legendary has taken an enormous step in solidifying the MonsterVerse as more than just a film series, but as a proper cinematic universe. This is a nearly 10-hour investment of viewers' time and promises to flesh out the universe in ways that truly matter and will impact the films. The show's biggest problem is its lack of cohesion with those films. It's impossible for the series to impact the current films when the current filmmaking team has no idea of what goes on within it. Similarly, it's impossible for the series to feel like a proper setup to anything because the showrunners have no idea what's going to happen with the upcoming movies. This isn't an easy issue to fix, as there is no roadmap at Legendary as to where the MonsterVerse is headed. Not even Adam Wingard has any idea of what any of this means. Even if he makes a third movie, this wasn't his plan from the start and still isn't an ending to the universe as a whole. It's merely the conclusion of his trilogy. How can we build to Avengers Endgame with each installment adding value to the universe if Legendary doesn't know what their endgame even is? They don't even know what their pit stops along the way to that will be. This means that Monarch exists in a very strange space, only being able to flesh out the gaps between the films that already exist. The show does a pretty good job at doing this by telling two captivating stories. Monarch's key formula was proven in episodes 1 through 3, 6, 8, and 9, with 10 serving a similar function. The series is at its strongest when it's telling both stories together, past and present. That's because the modern story, while fantastic, is nowhere near as entertaining as the past stories. The past plotline in Monarch was compelling enough to be its own series. In fact, the show might have been even better if it was 10 straight episodes of that. The formation of Monarch, discovery of the Titans, and drama with the government was all fantastic. These were compelling narratives that often felt rushed as a result of them playing sidekick to the modern storyline. The cast was amazing, down to the supporting characters like General Puckett and Dr. Suzuki, but the leads were really what shined. It took some getting used to Anders Holm's portrayal of Bill Randa, as he lacks the physical presence of John Goodman and has none of the underlying danger throughout most of the season, but a beautiful evolution occurs, leaving him as a broken man that makes the events of Kong Skull Island even more tragic in retrospect. Wyatt Russell is intensely charming and charismatic. Marie Yamamoto does a fantastic job balancing both characters out and providing a good emotional core for the group. The biggest downfall of these storylines was its unfortunate lack of attention to detail. Lots of questions are left unanswered, such as what happened to the Rodan to leave it stranded in the Philippines and what exactly happened to Bill Randa on the night it sank. Additionally, new logical leaps or continuity errors were opened through some of these storylines. Lots of Randa's dialogue in the 2017 film now make way less sense, having seen him interact directly with so many Titans before his trip to Skull Island. The entire plotline surrounding Godzilla and Castle Bravo is also frustratingly inconsistent with the events of Godzilla 2014. While most of these issues can be fixed through patchwork from the fans, nothing can properly undo the alteration to Godzilla getting bombed. As presented in 2014, he never makes it out of the ocean. As presented here, he's up and walking around for quite some time before the bomb goes off. Additionally, the largest hydrogen bomb ever detonated by the United States is portrayed with historically insensitive inaccuracy. The present plotline is very solid. While not being as outright entertaining, the mystery that unfolds is nearly as captivating. Unfortunately, this plotline has the opposite issues of the past, as it's given a little too much time to cook. Episodes 3 through 8 are almost all very slow because of the show's overcommitment to character development. I love character-driven episodes every now and again, but when you have 4 in a 10-episode run, it feels like we're dragging our feet at times, weighing the momentum of the entire season down. While I think the past plotline could have benefited from being its own 10-episode run, I think the modern plotline could have made for an incredible 6-episode season that moves at a slightly faster pace. It's hard to say I would want any of these episodes cut because I really love the ominous and ethereal mystery of episode 4, really appreciate the world building of episode 5, and understand the significance of episode 7 to the world at large, but I do think these stories could have been condensed. As with the past plotlines, all of the actors in the present do an amazing job. Kate is a great anchor for the series who starts off with a bit of a rough start in episode 1, but really grows into a fantastic core character. Kentaro is one of my favorite characters, aside from the strange 180 his character undergoes in episodes 7 and 8. This represents another one of the show's major issues. Lots of the characters and writing feels inconsistent. Kate goes from trying to abandon the mission in episode 6 after learning a former Monarch worker is helping her to teaming with Monarch in episode 7 with no questions asked. asked. In the same 2 episodes, Kate goes from telling May to go to hell at the end of episode 6 to acting like they're best friends at the start of episode 7, and characters' relationships and dynamics are also rushed and underdeveloped because of these inconsistencies. Decisions like these weigh the entire series down and make the present plotline feel over-dramatized with too much inner conflict. This can be seen no better than with May, who is on a downward spiral for 7 full episodes. May attacks Kentaro at random times, blaming him for her own actions. May continue to dig into Monarch, putting her on their radar, and yet she blames Kentaro for everything going wrong. She never thanks him to his face when he is constantly saving her life, and having a flawed character is fine, but she's never proven wrong or forced to grow from these actions. Similarly, she antagonizes Shaw throughout episode 4 and seemingly hates him without any evidence he's doing anything wrong up until episode 9 when she completely drops it and moves on without any acknowledgement. All that said, the show has fantastic highs. The emotional trauma and world building this series explores are the best of the MonsterVerse, feeling like the most organic growth from Gareth Edwards' Godzilla. The series' clear love for Kong Skull Island, Godzilla 2014, and commitment to trying to justify Mechagodzilla's rushed inclusion in Godzilla vs. Kong are also very appreciated. This leads into the final 2 episodes, which are truly amazing. The wonderful past plotlines and performances given by Wyatt Russell and Anders Holmes aside, the present really shines in these episodes. If you can invest in the emotional story being told over the season, these 2 episodes redeem the entire slow burn. Ren Watabe starts episode 9 with a harrowing performance that is picked up by Takehiro Hira in the episode's conclusion. This builds to the finale's heartbreaking and downright awards-worthy performance given by Marie Yamamoto, who is supported by Kurt Russell in an equally compelling role. This scene is the absolute peak of the MonsterVerse in terms of emotional payoffs. It is devastating. That momentum continues during Keiko's tearful reunion with Hiroshi that is equal parts bitter and sweet. It is truly astounding that a television series like Monarch Legacy of Monsters can exist. A massive budget live-action Godzilla television series coming out of the United States that ties directly into one of the longest-running Godzilla continuities to date is something I never would have dreamed of. Adding on the surprise ending with King Kong, this series truly is the peak of science fiction mystery television. The show is well directed and shot with wonderful atmosphere and exciting monsters. It fleshes out the smaller side of the universe in ways I have always wanted to see and has the most organic world building out of the entire MonsterVerse. The way this show presents Japan's response to the Titans is the best development of the public's reaction to Godzilla we have seen in any of these films and is better than everything that comes after Godzilla King of the Monsters. It's a shame the films don't continue this careful type of smaller world building, making this show feel even more out of place. While Monarch is at times a painfully slow burn, it is incredibly rewarding. The special effects are all top of the line. The presentation of the Titans is full of the impact and weight these creatures deserve. The show, while barely using Godzilla, establishes his presence so heavily he is felt through the entire season. This makes his appearances in episodes 1, 3, 6, and 10 even more exciting and helps amplify the fantastic battle with the Ion Dragon, which features my favorite Godzilla fighting style in the MonsterVerse so far. The show has a pretty solid human story that lacks at times in the modern day, but is made up for by the final 2 episodes. It has a grand kaiju story that is incredibly impressive given this is a TV show. The music by Leopold Ross is astounding. His style is so unique and strange and resonant with both exciting action pieces and crippling emotional ones. Lost Time is one of the most interesting and effective pieces of music ever written for the Godzilla franchise. Weighed down by pacing issues, frustrating character decisions, and continuity issues, this season is still able to achieve some of the highest highs of the MonsterVerse. With the guaranteed season 2, any unanswered questions are forgiven for now and provide fantastic base points to hype up the upcoming seasons. While I hope Monarch can tie into the current films in a more satisfying way in the future and that the movies reference the events of the show really soon, I still had a wonderful time watching and rewatching Monarch Legacy of Monsters and would recommend it to any MonsterVerse fans looking to engage in a compelling human drama that fleshes out this universe in more interesting and satisfying ways than many of the films. The gloves are off. In 2014, Gareth Edwards' Godzilla released to the world and kickstarted the MonsterVerse. Half a decade later, director Michael Dougherty released Godzilla King of the Monsters, a film which sought to be the Aliens to Edwards' Alien. No longer needing to take the Jaws approach of less is more, Dougherty did everything in his power to deliver the movie fans had been begging for from American producers for decades. Godzilla King of the Monsters took countless notes from critics of the 2014 film and used them to create the ultimate love letter to Godzilla fans. Titans. A film that isn't afraid to show the monsters, one that places the viewer directly in the action rather than teasing out fight sequences, and one that unites Godzilla with his most famous co-stars, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. The story begins during the events of G-Day, where we learn that the Russells, a Monarch family, were caught in San Francisco during Godzilla's battle with the Mutos. This results in their son Andrew falling victim to Godzilla's devastating actions. The family splits in the aftermath, with Emma taking her daughter Madison to China, where in 2019 she finishes a Titan communication device called the Orca. Emma uses the Orca to calm Mothra during her birth, only for an eco-terrorist group under the lead of Alan Jonah to burst in, seemingly kidnapping Emma and Madison and taking the Orca. Monarch learns about this during a Senate hearing that sees the UN about to seize control of Monarch so the Titans can be exterminated. Doctors Serizawa and Graham recruit Mark back to Monarch for help tracking the Orca after he left in the fallout of G-Day. Mark learns that Monarch's had a massive expansion over the last 5 years, with new facilities all over the globe monitoring 17 Titans and counting. Jonah's group storms Outpost 32 in Antarctica, capturing the base, which contains a frozen rival alpha to Godzilla called Monster Zero. At Monarch's new flagship undersea outpost called Castle Bravo, Godzilla appears to warn Monarch that danger is coming. Monarch and their in-house military unit G-Team mobilize following Godzilla's lead in the Argo Jet, a flying air fortress. During a confrontation between G-Team and Jonah's army, Emma unleashes Ghidorah using the Orca to awaken him. The three-headed dragon terrorizes the Monarch crew until Godzilla appears to save the day. During their battle, Dr. Graham is killed and Ghidorah gains the upper hand on Godzilla, only retreating once the Argo Jet appears and overwhelms him. In the aftermath, Emma calls Monarch and reveals that she believes the Titans are crucial to the survival of the planet. She plans to awaken them so that they can reclaim their world from humanity, reversing decades of nuclear contamination, pollution, and global warming. The Titans have a healing effect on their environment, and if the military is allowed to exterminate them, the planet would perish, and so would we. Against the protests of Madison, Emma continues her plan and unleashes Rodan from a volcano on Isla de Mara. The Argo Jet gets Rodan's attention and lures him to Ghidorah, who's closing in quickly. This kicks off what might be the best sequence in the entire MonsterVerse, as Rodan causes massive devastation to the city below before engaging in a dogfight against the Air Force and then taking on King Ghidorah mid-air. Rodan loses the battle, and right as Ghidorah closes in on the Argo, Godzilla appears. Godzilla begins decapitating Ghidorah, but just before his victory, the military detonates the Oxygen Destroyer on both Titans, seemingly killing Godzilla and allowing Ghidorah to claim his throne atop Rodan's volcano as the false king. Regrowing his head, Ghidorah causes a mass awakening and unleashes all the Titans at once, including a handful Monarch was unaware of. Turns out Ghidorah is not from Earth and is not part of the natural order, destroying Emma's entire plan. With the Titans rampaging across the globe and Godzilla seemingly dead, hope appears lost. This changes when Mothra hatches from her cocoon, a fully formed adult, and alerts Monarch to Godzilla's survival. Realizing all the Titans are under Ghidorah's control, with Godzilla as the only one who can break it, Monarch heads off to revive him with radiation from nuclear bombs. During their journey, their submarine is sucked through an underwater vortex, spitting them out in a massive underground cavern containing a sunken temple from times long forgotten, when man coexisted with Titans. As Monarch searches for Godzilla, G-Team battles Ghidorah and Rodan in Washington, D.C., which has been reduced to an apocalyptic wasteland. Emma tries to persuade Jonah that they need to stop Ghidorah, but he wants to let nature take its course without their intervention. Madison then steals the Orca and takes it to Fenway Park, where she broadcasts a signal which pacifies the Titans and draws them to Boston. With the submarine damaged, the existence of Hollow Earth proven, and the discovery of Godzilla weakened in his temple, Serizawa must sacrifice himself to supercharge Godzilla with the energy from one of their bombs. The plan works, and Godzilla surfaces, blasting his atomic breath in the air in the most triumphant moment in the entire MonsterVerse. Monarch and the military join the fight with Godzilla against Ghidorah. Mark tracks the Orca to Fenway as Emma leaves Jonah's group in search of Madison. Ghidorah arrives in Boston first, where he destroys Fenway Park and attacks Madison. Before he kills her, Godzilla arrives, kicking off an extended final battle which lasts for the better part of 30 minutes. Just as the fight kicks off, Rick Stanton realizes Godzilla's excess radiation has him at critical mass. He's going to explode like an atom bomb, killing him and taking out Boston in the process. With Godzilla and Ghidorah battling to the death in the city, Mark and G-Team search for Madison. Soon after, Mothra joins the fight, helping Godzilla gain the upper hand. The small victory is spoiled with the arrival of Rodan, now loyal to Ghidorah, who attacks Mothra and battles her while Ghidorah takes on Godzilla. Emma arrives and rescues Mark and his friends, navigating the war zone until they arrive at the remains of their old house, where they find Madison alive in the rubble. Mothra, on the verge of death, lures Rodan in close and unleashes a stinger into his chest, defeating him. King Ghidorah then overpowers Godzilla, flying him into the upper atmosphere and then dropping him back to Earth, nearly killing him. As Ghidorah goes in for the final blow, Mothra saves Godzilla, sacrificing her life for his. Mothra's energy seeps into Godzilla, allowing him a way to vent his excess radiation before it kills him. Ghidorah starts to drain Godzilla's energy as the Russells repair the Orca. Mark and Madison are rescued by Monarch, while Emma rights her wrongs by taking the Orca into the city, luring Ghidorah away from Monarch and Godzilla. This buys Godzilla enough time to go thermonuclear, transforming into his burning state. He easily defeats Ghidorah using his atomic pulse. In the aftermath, Godzilla uses the reverse kiss of death to destroy Ghidorah's final head, putting an end to the dragon. Just then, a series of Titans arrive in Boston, responding to Madison's Orca call. They bow to Godzilla, who has officially earned the title of King of the Monsters. This kicks off an exciting montage that teases massive changes coming to the world, deep lore reveals, and hyping up the upcoming fight between Godzilla and King Kong. A post-credits teaser then sees Alan Jonah's group buying the decapitated Ghidorah head, which was lost off the coast of Isla de Mara. None of the other MonsterVerse entries hit the way Godzilla King of the Monsters does, and that's because none of the other entries were made by Michael Dougherty. It is truly impressive how much Dougherty cared for this universe and how much his absence was felt immediately after his departure. Dougherty's close attention to detail and care for building the lore of the cinematic universe, developing the world in small and thoughtful ways, and tying in threads to previous entries is unmatched. Godzilla King of the Monsters is soaked in a love for the films that came before and an appreciation for where things were going after. Not only that, but the movie was jam-packed with tributes, Easter eggs, and references to Godzilla's, at the time, 65-year-old legacy. The movie is incredibly paced, managing to glide from action sequence to action sequence while still allowing for character building and deep reveals about the mythology of the MonsterVerse. The cast of characters is larger than before, but focuses around a family core in a very digestible way. The movie never feels overloaded or weighed down by its ensemble. Every character is given a specific job and personality that is well defined and consistent throughout the film. Each Monarch worker adds a certain value to the organization and makes sense why they're involved in this story. Regardless of how people feel about some of these characters, the writing for them was consistent, well developed, and meaningful. This film also takes the time to develop its lead characters beyond their relevance to the plot. Within just a few scenes, we have a complete picture of who Mark Russell is as a character, both inside and outside the story. This is a feat only Kong Skull Island accomplishes to such a successful degree. Godzilla King of the Monsters has a rather unfortunate and undeserved legacy. The film came out amidst the most crowded blockbuster summer in cinema history and failed to make an impression as a result. The film also commits 3 cardinal sins that hold it back from achieving its full potential. The movie's overly witty dialogue gets in its own way at times, with one single joke from Sam Coleman being cited by countless fans as the movie's biggest downfall. Another major issue the film makes is with its cinematography. Lawrence Shear does a commendable job delivering countless instantly iconic images in many single frames which comprise the visual peak of the MonsterVerse, but those astounding visuals are drowned in a sea of chaos. In an attempt to build the scale of the Titans and root the viewer in the human perspective, the camera is constantly shaking, obscured by man-made objects, or overly crowded, distracting from the amazing battles happening around them. It's because of the cinematography that Godzilla King of the Monsters plays very similar to a theme park ride in the best and worst of ways, which isn't always ideal for viewers of a movie who prefer a more standard, comprehensible approach to action. The film's final major mistake was killing Dr. Graham in a way that felt outwardly disrespectful to the previous film, turning some viewers off. But I truly believe that if given a second chance, this team could have refined these issues to deliver the best film in the MonsterVerse. These issues don't hold Godzilla King of the Monsters back from being the best American Godzilla movie ever made. This is the only US Godzilla movie that feels like a film Toho would have made. While Godzilla 2014 was made with clear love for Toho's filmography, it's far more Spielbergian. King of the Monsters is a classic Godzilla film to the core. The movie was baptized in the fires of Godzilla's history, capturing both the best elements of the early 60s Godzilla films and the Heisei series. From the inclusion of Toho's Big Four to the use of Akira Ifukube's Godzilla theme and Yuji Koseki's Mothra theme, King of the Monsters' deep admiration for the source material is unmistakable. This love is carried through grew into the monster's designs. Godzilla's 2014 design has been updated to now feature additional classic elements, elevating it to one of the best Godzilla designs ever made. Rodan and King Ghidorah both feature their greatest designs that are equal parts nostalgic and contemporary. The only monster that breaks this mold is Mothra, who features a radical redesign that is a perfect blend of form and function. For the first time ever, Mothra truly looks like she could hold her own against her fellow kaiju. Mothra's new bioluminescence is used wonderfully to give her a fresh and iconic aesthetic that complements the new use of Godzilla's intimidation display, which allows him to charge his spines and glow without needing to unleash his atomic breath. This is also the only MonsterVerse Godzilla film that truly has something to say, a crucial ingredient in elevating any Godzilla film to the next level. While Godzilla 2014 makes a soft attempt to have an anti-nuclear message and themes about nature's balance, they aren't explored in depth. As any good sequel should do, King of the Monsters picks up the themes of the previous film and explores them deeper, challenging them in new ways. King of the Monsters' clear environmental message is baked into the plot and influences the characters and the world around them. The movie challenges what role humanity truly plays in the world and how they have impacted the ecosystems around them. It shows an uncomfortable reality that unless mankind starts making changes to help save the world, countless people are going to die. And while Emma's plan turns out to have positive impacts on the planet, proving her theory's basis, it also has irreversible, devastating consequences that show how important it is not to rush into environmental decisions and how tricky finding the key to coexistence really is. Godzilla King of the Monsters isn't just a wonderful entry in the MonsterVerse, it's a magnificent entry in the Godzilla franchise as a whole. The human story is well executed, with many fantastic characters with deep and interesting histories, a complex set of human antagonists who are both justified in their motives and despicable based on their actions, complete with well thought out and developed character arcs for the core trio. This movie might strike the best balance out of the entire Godzilla franchise between characterizing the kaiju while still preserving their godlike status and maintaining a sense of reverence for them. Godzilla's character was expanded upon and developed incredibly naturally from the 2014 film, showing him as the noble and intelligent creature he is while building up his responsibility as nature's balance and showing the rage that births within him. Mothra's pure-hearted nature and majesty is at its peak here. Rodan's unpredictable nature and aggressive personality fits him perfectly, with the film giving him his best sequence he's ever received. And King Ghidorah finally achieves his proper potential for the first time ever, as a planet-destroying threat that is sadistic and twisted in ways that perfectly contrast against Godzilla. Doherty's decision to give each of the heads their own personalities, aided by the wonderful performances from Alan Maxon, Jason Liles, and Richard Dorton playing against TJ Storm's Godzilla, was a stroke of genius. All of this was tied together by the incredible VFX team who provided the previs the mocap sessions were based on and brought the entire film to life afterward. The rest of the movie comes together pretty well. The special effects are wonderfully handled with many of the greatest visuals of the MonsterVerse. Some shots don't hold up as well as the other MonsterVerse entries, but the care put into them is unmistakable. While the film's use of elemental effects weighs the visuals down, they play into the movie's themes wonderfully, as does the stylistic color grading, which represents different aspects of nature and keep the movie feeling fresh and unique as it develops. The cinematography is too busy for its own good, but doesn't impede the story too much. The best part of the film is the music, which is on another level. Bear McCreary's integration of classic themes with his own work was masterful. He modernized decades-old music and built a soundtrack around it that could support those older themes without them feeling out of place or unearned. The deep care and thought put into which instruments would be used for each character, making the themes culturally specific and building wonderful motifs throughout the movie, mirror the high attention to detail put into the movie from the rest of the filmmakers. This was the last time the MonsterVerse felt truly coherent and meaningful as more than just a film series, but as a cinematic universe. Godzilla King of the Monsters' clear intentions, both thematically and world-building wise, elevate it beyond all other MonsterVerse films. While some things like the Argo and Monarch's expansion from 2014 felt slightly rushed, they were justified because we'd never explored Monarch from their perspective before. Other things like the histories of the Titans, their relationships to humanity, and the world at large were full of so much potential and intrigue. With compelling setups for the future in the form of Alan Jonah's group and clear intentions to build up mutated titans, the MonsterVerse seemed like a world of limitless potential that would be capitalized on soon. There is no other movie like Godzilla King of the Monsters, a film which perfectly brought Toho's Godzilla to the world in ways that had never been seen before. I would gladly recommend King of the Monsters to any Godzilla fan, monster movie fan, or science fiction action adventure fan anytime. Following the release of Godzilla King of the Monsters, the MonsterVerse looked like it was entering a world of of limitless potential. It seemed that the MonsterVerse was finally achieving its potential as a Toho-styled universe where Godzilla would work alongside Monarch to protect the world from the rampaging monsters. With countless Easter eggs and setups for the future baked into the King of the Monsters end credits roll, fans had a pretty good idea of where things were headed and what we could look forward to. Leading into the release of Godzilla vs. Kong, the comic tie-in Godzilla Dominion promised to tell the story of Godzilla's reign as king. Written by Greg Keyes, the writer of the MonsterVerse novelizations, starting with King of the Monsters onward, and one of the few people making a genuine attempt to keep the universe consistent across all the expanded material. The comic features art by Drew Edward Johnson, returning from Godzilla Aftershock, with Arthur Adams once again providing the cover art. The story begins shortly after the events of Godzilla King of the Monsters, with the Titans still on the loose. Godzilla senses a disturbance in nature's balance while at sea, surfacing to find Scylla battling the Coast Guard as she attempts to feast upon a lost nuclear bomb. Driven by her insatiable hunger, Scylla and Godzilla fight until he throws her into an oil refinery, exploding her and sending her retreating into the ocean. Godzilla, weakened by the events of 2019, heads out in search of a new home. Along the way, he responds to a disturbance in the Amazon, where he finds Behemoth at war with Amalok. Godzilla sides with a wounded Behemoth, causing Amalok to submit after a very brief fight. As Godzilla remembers how much the world has changed over time, he returns to the site of his old temple. While he's appreciative of Serizawa's sacrifice, the temple has been reduced to a crater, its radiation draining into Hollow Earth, leaving it unsuitable for Godzilla's needs. A swarm of murderfish attack Godzilla under the lead of a massive fish that has arrived from Hollow Earth. Godzilla tears its spine out and atomic breaths to the swarm. He then continues his search for a new home, tapping into the planet and feeling the entire ecosystem at once. Godzilla remembers a time when he had a home on an island like Skull Island with the native tribe like the Iwi. He was driven out by his old rival, a Kong powerful enough to defeat him. Godzilla looks to the moon, where he realizes his senses have been homed by Mothra, whose spirit is still in him. She guides him back to the rival's island. Along the way, Godzilla discovers a swarm of murdered whales and a downed Monarch sub. He comes upon Nikika, the Kraken Titan, trapped in a nest. Godzilla frees him and destroys the submarine responsible, surfacing to find Monarch at war with hostile helicopters and an oil rig being used as the villainous base. Godzilla unleashes his atomic breath, destroying the entire facility. Taking a Hollow Earth tunnel from one side of the planet to the next, Godzilla absorbs enough radiation to feel confident taking on the rival. Trekking across icy lands, green beaches, and lots of ocean, Godzilla finally arrives at the sunken remains of his old island. Titan corpses litter the area, and the old civilization has been lost to sea. Trying to challenge the rival, Godzilla is attacked by Tiamat, who has claimed this area as her territory after being awakened from Stone Mountain in Georgia by Ghidorah. Tiamat puts up a great fight, blinding Godzilla and using her razor-sharp body to both ensnare and slice up the Titan. She creates a whirlpool that sucks them both to Hollow Earth, where they are spit out on land, giving Godzilla the advantage. He seizes the moment by stomping her head and making her submit, fleeing from this territory. Godzilla has arrived, discovering the skull of the rival and the remains of a Hollow Earth civilization he used to live with. From here, Godzilla telepathically calls the Titans around the world to rest, putting an end to the mass awakening. Taking inspiration from the preface of the Godzilla King of the Monsters novelization, this comic is written entirely from Godzilla's perspective. The entire story is told from the Titan's point of view, with narration describing his motivations and feelings. The story never places the reader in the human perspective, with humanity only appearing as small spectators to the broader story. This comic also places the reader directly inside Godzilla's point of view multiple times, showing how he sees the world. Unfortunately, Godzilla Dominion constantly misses the mark. The preface for King of the Monsters worked so well because it was so brief. It gave only a fragment of insight into how Godzilla experiences the world and how his territorial nature supports the theory he's nature's balance. This maintained the sense of mystique around the character vital to making him compelling. Dominion peels those layers back too much, unraveling the character in the process. By telling the story from Godzilla's perspective, it demystifies him entirely, robbing Godzilla of any nuance or characterization. This comic portrays Godzilla as nothing more than a vessel acting out nature's command. While Serizawa believed that nature had an order and that Godzilla acted to restore that order, it wasn't supposed to be taken this literally. Godzilla attacked the Mutos out of self-preservation. They are a parasitic species that feast upon his kind. As the top of the food chain, Godzilla ensures his survival by battling them. Godzilla's fight with Ghidorah is personal. Ghidorah is a rival alpha seeking to destroy the world at large and kill Godzilla. They have a deep history with each other. Godzilla's actions benefit himself just as much as they do the rest of the planet. King of the Monsters ends by teasing Godzilla will have to undo Ghidorah's mess, battling titans around the world to put them back to sleep or send them somewhere where they won't cause destruction or chaos. Taking away Godzilla's animalistic territorial instincts and replacing them with a divine order from nature causes more issues than it solves. Emma Russell's thesis was proven accurate. The Titan's awakening did help to restore the natural order. If that's what Godzilla wants, why does he force them all to sleep? Why not just break up their grudge matches when they occur? Why didn't he intervene in centuries of humanity's pollution, radiation leaks, environmental damage, or wars? Godzilla only battles Scylla because he's worried the nuke will go off. But wouldn't that feed him and help solve his issue in this comic? And why worry now? What about the decades of bond testings he allowed to go unpunished from humanity? If Godzilla is nothing more than a divine force acting upon nature's orders, then the Titans would be helping, and humanity would be his enemies. Godzilla Dominion tries to tackle some of the ideas from King of the Monsters directly, but expands upon them in ways that strip Godzilla of his samurai-like status, turning him into nothing more than a robot acting upon nature's orders. Godzilla has essentially been robbed of all of his free will, making him an infallible creature that can do no wrong because he's always doing what the planet needs. It makes Godzilla's decisions far less meaningful and undoes the complexity that King of the Monsters portrayed him with. It also complicates Adam Wingard's portrayal of Godzilla that leans far more into the territorial, aggressive, and petty nature of the creature and away from both his noble mission and the idea he's the key to coexistence. This entire comic is unfortunately sloppy. The writing feels self-important and juvenile, often coming across as overly indulgent. Telling a story completely from Godzilla's perspective could be a fantastic idea to explore in a comic. Adding the narration robs it of any nuance or mystery that might have otherwise existed, dumbing it down, demystifying Godzilla, and making things too rigid moving forward. This comic might have worked better had there been no narration at all. Some elements, such as Mothra's influence on Godzilla or his connection to the rival, would have needed reworking, but making the comic exclusively visual would have allowed for interpretations of the material that engaged readers on a deeper level. For a premise as simple as Godzilla searching for a new home after his temple was destroyed, there's still plot beats that are overly convoluted. Godzilla's mystical connection to Mothra has confused many readers into thinking Godzilla gained an ability that connects him to the entire world at once. But Godzilla's always had the ability to sense the whole world, which is seen in both previous movies and stated outright one page before the Mothra vision. This makes the scene very confusing as to what it's implying Godzilla has gained from her spirit other than reassurance in his decision to challenge the rival. The entire rival plotline is unneeded and convoluted. Having an island with natives like the Iwi worshipping a Kong that Godzilla doesn't feel safe return to, but not having it be Skull Island setting up Godzilla vs. Kong is wildly confusing. In fact, this entire plotline does nothing to set up Godzilla vs. Kong in any way other than developing Godzilla's hatred for the Kong species, which is now out of place given that Godzilla only acts out of nature's orders. Revealing a second temple under the island in Hollow Earth comes completely out of nowhere. Godzilla's flashbacks to the past are of the island on the surface world, not a temple beneath it, which is now stated to be his original temple. This is a useless development. Godzilla already had a temple in the previous movie with a rich history implied with it. This muddies that timeline and robs that temple of its original significance. It also raises questions as to why Godzilla doesn't return to his temple in the following films. Tiamat's introduction is fantastic, with the kaiju making a bold impression right away, but even that storyline has confused many readers. With the writer and artist of this comic making bold claims that aren't supported by the book itself, Tiamat's connection to the rival isn't clear. The comic seems to imply she killed the rival, who was too old to defend himself at this point, backed up by out-of-comic statements from the creatives. But this creates a confusing timeline, as Tiamat was sleeping in the US until shortly before this comic started, and yet the rival has already decayed to be nothing but a skull. The most frustrating part of this entire experience is how quickly it resolves the conflict post King of the Monsters. Within one single panel, Godzilla uses a new telepathic ability that has never been hinted to before to call all the Titans around the world to rest. Is this the ability he gained from Mothra? It's never stated. What made Ghidorah so menacing was that he had the ability to create a mass awakening, summoning every Titan from around the world to rise at once. Ghidorah accomplished this because he's not part of the natural order and is an alien with powers not even Godzilla can match up to. Giving Godzilla this ability, it's just too easy. It dismantles the potential for where this universe was heading. Godzilla's fight with the Titans was resolved in just a few weeks because he did a big think so big they got sleepy. Godzilla Dominion is the unfortunate victim of the MonsterVerse's changing priorities. As the universe made an abrupt pivot away from Michael Dougherty's story, the world building of the previous film was quickly covered up. The credits montage from King of the Monsters was supposed to set up where this universe was heading. Originally, Godzilla and Monarch were busy with Titans rampaging across the globe. Monarch would summon the Titans to Hollow-Earth through a portal on Skull Island using a device called the Orca Z, building upon the themes of King of the Monsters, disrupting the balance of nature on the island and forcing Godzilla and Kong into a collision course with each other. These plot elements were completely dropped, killing almost the entire setup for where this universe would go. Even if these ideas would have overcrowded Godzilla vs. Kong, making the movie too plot-driven, they still could have been references for where the story would go after that movie. Instead, they were abruptly rushed through and wrapped up in the shortest MonsterVerse comic to date. Godzilla Dominion is a super mixed bag. While the plot writing is solid with fantastic scenes, such as Godzilla reflecting upon Serizawa and Mothra, the narration is childish, fitting in better with your standard Godzilla fanfiction than the actual MonsterVerse. The narration style was proven in the King of the Monsters novelization, where it gave Godzilla a certain nobility, but utilized this heavily, it unmasks Godzilla too much and destroys the subtlety of his character by taking away the ability to read into his actions or interpret his motives on your own. Much like with Godzilla Aftershock, Johnson continues to borrow his posing and modeling for Godzilla too directly from the films, toys, and other media, keeping Godzilla just as stiff as he was before. Some of Godzilla's posing is so clearly borrowed from things outside of the MonsterVerse that Godzilla sometimes looks more like his 1998 iteration than his 2019 one. The reuse of poses makes this comic feel cheap and the action feel copy and pasted. Other things like forgetting to draw Nikika's shell, drawing Scylla to look more crab than spider, with her tentacles now looking very different than the film, and pretty much everything going on with Amalok hold the artwork back even more. Even with all of this, the story has fantastic ideas. Godzilla being stuck between his want for a new home and his need to protect the planet could be the basis for one of his best stories ever told. Furthering the conflict between Godzilla and Scylla, seeing Godzilla perform heroic actions like saving Behemoth and Nikika, and introducing one of the MonsterVerse's best titans in the form of Tiamat, Godzilla Dominion has so much going for it. The comic features great action with wonderful ideas constantly being introduced. It makes more than its fair share of missteps, but still manages to be filled with that classic Godzilla energy. With the films all but abandoning the plot threads set up by Godzilla King of the Monsters, fans such as myself must take solace in this story, as it's the only time we've ever seen the world of that movie developed in an immediate and consequential way. It's also because of that decision to abandon those plot threads that Godzilla Dominion will seemingly forever be a symbol of the lost potential the MonsterVerse has suffered after the 2019 film. For all of those reasons, I would only recommend Godzilla Dominion to hardcore MonsterVerse fans, hardcore Godzilla fans, and general monster fans who are on the younger side. I believe this comic works best as an introduction to this universe for younger readers who are looking for more spectacle than story and who don't mind the shifting priorities of the cinematic universe at large. Leading into the release of Godzilla vs. Kong, the prequel comic Kingdom Kong was announced in late 2019 to be released in early 2020. The comic was delayed multiple times along with the film, finally releasing in April of 2021 alongside Godzilla Dominion just after the release of Godzilla vs. Kong. Kingdom Kong was written by Maria Nello with art by Muhammad Yazid, returning from Skull Island: The Birth of Kong. Continuing his work from the MonsterVerse Godzilla comics, Arthur Adams provides the cover art. The story begins with Audrey Byrne's memories of 2019 as she and her friend Tam Nassar are deployed with G-Team on an unknown mission. In the present day of 2021, Audrey and a group of 4 other pilots arrive at Skull Island as part of an elite team. At Monarch's Skull Island outpost, they are greeted by Colonel Joanne Edwards and Dr. Houston Brooks. The team learns they've been selected as Monarch's best pilots and will be training to enter a Hollow-Earth portal discovered inside a cave on the island with Corporal David Lind. Monarch plans to use explosives to make the cave big enough for the soldiers to pilot jets through the Hollow-Earth vortex. Before they do, they train for the high speeds and intense gravitational shifts, as well as for survival in the monstrous terrain below. Brooks learns a devastating storm left behind by Ghidorah, which has been raging in the same spot in the Pacific for years, has started to move towards the island. A few Monarch soldiers are attacked by a spirit tiger. Kong appears to save them. The tiger lashes out and bites Kong, prompting him to snap its neck and then leave after seeing the people are alright. The G-Team pilots are sent out to train in Skull Island's ecosystem. Audrey is saved from a death jackal attack and, after suffering a brief panic attack, returns the favor by saving them from a Mother Longlegs. Brooks tracks Kong in a helicopter as he goes about his evening routine. Brooks observes Kong eating a mere squid, noticing how large he's grown over the years. Kong is attacked by a swarm of psycho vultures while trying to help an injured skir buffalo. One of the vultures' lightning attacks lights the tree Kong is holding on fire, allowing him to wield it like a flaming torch against the swarm. Brooks notices how lonely Kong is and how he's outgrown the island, needing somewhere bigger to sustain him. Audrey's haunting memories of 2019 return in a dream. She was deployed with G-Team during the Mass Awakening to defend San Diego from an attack by the Titan Camazotz. Camazotz brought a swarm of minion-like creatures to the city with him. During the battle, Audrey broke formation to take down a minion in the city while the rest of her team was killed by dozens of other minions and Camazotz. In a last-ditch attempt to kill the Titan, Nassar launches an attack that left them in a coma. Audrey blames herself and has never checked in to find out if Nassar has recovered. Audrey is confronted by one of her fellow pilots who reveals the others don't trust her to keep composure. At the same time, Brooks is pressured into approving the drill team's excavation of the portal site and use of a drone to map the vortex. He's uneasy about the decision due to tremors under the island, the approaching storm, and a strange Yui legend about a devil from below rising to claim its kingdom once the world is swallowed by darkness. During a simulated portal entry, Audrey outperforms her peers and proves herself as Monarch's best pilot. As Kong explores the decayed remains of a temple long forgotten to time, the drill team blasts open the vortex, unleashing a supersonic screech from inside. The sound sends Audrey into a nightmare, where she's haunted by the loss of Nassar. The drill team's drone breaches the cave, provoking a bat-like titan in the process. Responding to the screech, Brooks finally puts the pieces together and realizes the Iwi legend was warning about Camazotz trying to claim the island from Kong after the storms merge. Edwards consoles Audrey about Nassar, and the other pilots offer their comfort and support, revealing they all have similar Titan-inflicted trauma. Another earthquake strikes the island as Ghidorah's storm merges with Skull Island's storm, anchoring it in place. Kong appears to investigate as Camazotz comes bursting out of a mountain, unleashing his hellswarm upon the island. Monarch launches an evacuation of the drill team and sends G-Team out, with Audrey as the squad's captain, to combat the hellswarm. The final battle kicks off with King Kong versus Camazotz. Kong, while physically stronger, finds himself at a disadvantage on all fronts. Camazotz has more ranged attacks, the ability to fly, and a supersonic screech which can disorient Kong. Audrey convinces her team to take on Camazotz and distract him long enough for Kong to gain the upper hand. To ensure Kong's victory, Audrey goes supersonic in front of Camazotz, erupting the bat-like Titan's sensitive eardrums and allowing Kong to easily seize victory, punching Camazotz back through the Hollow Earth portal. Kong saves Audrey from her failing plane, and the two share a small moment together. Brooks decides he's become too sloppy and retires from Monarch, like he planned to do back in 2012. He hands over command of Skull Island to his number 2, Eileen Andrews. She reveals that Kong, as an apex predator, was forced to defend the island from Camazotz, but in the eyes of Godzilla, that has just cemented Kong as an alpha titan, meaning he will not be allowed to leave the island peacefully. David Lind arrives and is advised against his mission to Hollow Earth. Brooks reveals the Skull Island portal is unstable and will most likely collapse or kill the team as they enter. Lind brushes it off, believing his sacrifice will get humanity one step closer to Hollow Earth and the key to coexistence. Audrey returns home to visit the hospital, learning Nassar has survived and is no longer in a coma. As Monarch attempts to evacuate the Iwi and Gia watches on in fear, Kong returns to his temple remains and finds cave art depicting a Godzilla battling a Kong. Kingdom Kong is a very solid entry in the MonsterVerse comic lineup. The story is well written and paced, coming in at one of the shorter comic entries while also having the most traditional narrative and character arcs. This storyline does the best job getting the readers invested in the human story and their journeys. Brooks' slow realization Kong has outgrown the island, meaning the species is not native to it, is a great setup for Godzilla vs. Kong. His unraveling of the Camazotz legend is a little more frustrating. It's painfully obvious from the start where things are headed and takes him way too long to figure out. Making Camazotz one of the titans that attacked in 2019 but not having Brooks figure out the prophecy sooner was frustrating. Audrey stands out as being the most compelling character out of any of the MonsterVerse comics. Undergoing a traditional story arc by overcoming her past trauma and learning to be brave, she has the most fleshed out personality of any of the MonsterVerse comic leads. Despite the interpersonal conflict between Audrey and the other pilots feeling a little forced, the rest of the human plotline comes together very well. Kingdom Kong has the best kaiju story of any of the comics. Kong is portrayed wonderfully, expressing his noble nature, warrior-like instincts, and lonely desire for connection in a storyline that lets Kong exist inside and out of action. Camazotz is awesome, making a bold impression with very little page time. Camazotz's presence is baked into the comic from the very start. The wonderful dream sequence with the Titan helps to create a foreboding atmosphere leading into his reveal. His fight with Kong is very exciting, with Kong and Camazotz countering each other in interesting ways. Kingdom Kong ranks alongside Skull Island: The Birth of Kong as being one of the more meaningful MonsterVerse comic tie-ins. The story is very well handled and makes a strong attempt to build up the plot of Godzilla vs. Kong directly. This is made a little awkward with the reveal in the film that the entire crew dies upon their attempted entry to Hollow-Earth. And while helpful to the world building of the MonsterVerse, the story of why Kong's island was swallowed by a storm is something that really should have explained in the movie itself rather than supplemental material. As portrayed here, it also has a few plot holes that go unaddressed. Ghidorah fled Isla de Mara straight to Washington, D.C. In this comic, they state he created a storm in the Pacific near Skull Island around this time. There's no explanation as to why this was the only one of his storms that persisted after Ghidorah's death either. And the reason as to why it merges with Skull Island's natural storm system is vague. Ghidorah's storm goes on the move after Monarch opens up the Hollow-Earth portal, seemingly magnetizing it towards the island, yet later it's stated to be from Camazotz attempting to exit the portal. In either case, the mechanism of why Ghidorah's storm goes on the move is never made clear, and we never find out exactly what is occurring with this plotline. There are larger world-building issues as well. Monarch possesses scans of Hollow-Earth, but in Godzilla vs. Kong, it's made clear that Hollow-Earth is only viewed as a theory. This makes Apex's reveal they have actual scans of Hollow-Earth for the first time ever very confusing. Finally, this comic shows the Iwi evacuating from Skull Island, yet in the film it's revealed they all died in this storm. While not perfect, Kingdom Kong is a great read. The comic is well structured and moves at a great pace. The story is a little tired by this point, featuring more ancient prophecies, Iwi legends, and the discovery of yet another cave painting, but the well-written lead characters and kaiju storyline hold up very well. Zid's artwork is wonderful, ranking with Skull Island: The Birth of Kong as the best out of any of these comics. Weighed down by quality control issues and continuity errors, this comic gets a little muddy, but the inclusion of the Spirit Tiger, a scrapped concept from Kong Skull Island, and lots of additional attempts to help tie into the mythology of the MonsterVerse are very appreciated. I would gladly recommend Kingdom Kong to any King Kong fan, adventure comic fan, or fan of the MonsterVerse who wants to dive into the lore of the universe. I would also recommend this to anybody who may have been confused by some of the breezier world building presented in Godzilla vs. Kong. As part of the Legends of the MonsterVerse, the Omnibus Collection, which compiled all previous MonsterVerse comics, Legendary Comics released Godzilla Fight or Flight. Written by Brian Buccellato with art by Muhammad Yazid, returning from Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, and Kingdom Kong, the comic released on August 16, 2023 as part of an ongoing Kickstarter campaign. The story begins with a flashback to G-Day, as fighter pilot Tyler Nye shares his experience to his fellow soldiers. Tyler was a young boy who found himself trapped in a car as the male Muto and Godzilla began their legendary fight. This leads into a quick recap of Godzilla's final battle in San Francisco. In 2024, Tyler's fellow pilots laugh at his story and throw elementary school level insults at him. Just then, they get word Godzilla was spotted off the Atlantic coast. Tyler is the only one in his squad to believe in Godzilla. Everyone else sees him as a threat that needs to be stopped. Tyler reminds everyone about 2019, when Ghidorah caused the mass awakening, forcing Godzilla and Mothra to unite against him and Rodan to save the planet. Everyone makes fun of Tyler, again continuing this school-like taunting by telling him to grow up. Godzilla leaves his territory in the Bermuda Triangle, heading straight for the US. Tyler fears his upcoming mission, but claims he'll be fine taking on Godzilla. Tyler goes by G-Stan, writing the name on his helmet and plane. He takes off with the Falcon Squad. They intercept Godzilla, who goes on a rampage, destroying a factory with seemingly no motivation. Tyler annoys his fellow soldiers, claiming a rival Titan must be hiding nearby. The Falcons engage and Godzilla begins to murder them one by one. Tyler, believing in his heart that Godzilla's on their side, fails to aid his soldiers in combat, watching them die. He takes on damage from the atomic breath and ditches his plane, apologizing to Godzilla and wishing him luck in finding whatever he's searching for. The comic ends with Godzilla roaring in front of the remains of a factory as a massive mechanical eye is revealed. Godzilla Fight or Flight is unfortunately the worst entry in the MonsterVerse. The writing is intensely childish. The characters literally speak like children, throwing playground insults at each other, talking about butts with added commentary like, "Ew, that's gross." This comic reads like it was written by a 10-year-old, and this might be intentional. It's possible this comic was written for young children, but the overuse of the word ass in an 18-page story throws that theory off a little. This comic wasn't advertised advertised for children and claimed to be a bonus story fleshing out the events of Godzilla vs. Kong. The story doesn't do a good job at that either. Godzilla vs. Kong seemed to imply the jets responding to Godzilla in Pensacola were Apex jets, defending their factory. Now we learn they're piloted by US soldiers trying to defend their country, making Godzilla killing them feel awkward. The reveal he's searching for Mechagodzilla is no longer an ends that justifies the means. The comic doesn't address this, instead reading like a fanfiction apology tour trying to explain away Godzilla's bad behavior in the film. They even go as far as to show Tyler surviving the incident as if Godzilla hadn't killed anyone. This comic and its lead character feel like the average child fan of the MonsterVerse furiously commenting on a YouTube video defending Godzilla's honor way too much. Tyler is essentially just a self-insert character, living through the events of the films while having no effect on anything around him, only existing to fanboy over Godzilla. The only redeeming element of this story is the artwork by Zid. As always, Zid manages to perfectly capture the visual aesthetic of the universe. His artwork nails key moments and visuals from the previous Godzilla films. The 2014 panels are rooted in geography any viewer of the film will recognize. The recap artwork for both 2014 and King of the Monsters looks incredible. It's great to see Rodan, Mothra, and Ghidorah return even in a flashback. The Pensacola attack looks incredible. Key visuals from Godzilla vs. Kong are replicated perfectly. This comic also fleshes out the Apex attack, showing a bit more of the jet fight, which is great. As someone who supported the MonsterVerse Omnibus collection and was excited to read the new story, I couldn't be more disappointed. While Zid's artwork is fantastic, the comic was a little embarrassing to read. The frustrating part is that it has a good concept. A character who survived through the events of G-Day only because Godzilla rescued them is refreshing to see. Normally returning to G-Day is just done to see Godzilla kill children to add depth to the story's current protagonist. Having a character start to worship Godzilla vindicated by the events of King of the Monsters only to force them into combat against him is a wonderful conflict. Setting it during the events of Godzilla vs. Kong is even better and could have helped add depth to Godzilla's sudden shift in behavior. But Tyler doesn't even try. He lets his bullies die and then abandons ship, making him a worse person than they ever were. This might be better as one of the children's entries alongside Godzilla vs. Kong Sometimes Friends Fight and Kong and Me, except it still features words that kids would consider cuss words and has Godzilla killing innocent people. Maybe this is to add a level of edge to the comic, gearing it towards middle schoolers. Either way, it was an enormous disappointment. Even as a middle schooler, I would have appreciated a more nuanced take on Godzilla. Sadly, Godzilla Fight or Flight didn't do it for me. I would only recommend this comic to very young Godzilla fans, especially the ones who take the character way too seriously. Greenlit back in 2015, Godzilla vs. Kong moved into production at the same time as Godzilla King of the Monsters. The film landed up-and-coming horror director Adam Wingard in May of 2017. With a script that was constantly changing, the writer's credits for this movie continued to grow until production. One major script revision was done by King of the Monsters director Michael Dougherty. The script was more of a direct sequel to that film, dealing with the ramifications of the Mass Awakening and developing Monarch naturally from that movie. The Orca was back in the form of the Orca Z, and Skull Island was crucial to the exploration of Hollow-Earth. This script didn't last forever, undergoing massive changes that removed enormous elements from the film. During production of Godzilla vs. Kong, an altered version of the movie was being shot. This removed countless elements carried over from King of the Monsters and was a bit darker than the final movie. The film featured Lance Reddick in a prominent role as Serizawa's replacement at Monarch, Jessica Henwick as a reporter, alongside Zhejiang returning from the last movie. The new plot dealt with Apex Cybernetics using the Orca Z to lure Godzilla around the globe, making him rampage in different areas in an attempt to frame him so the public would support Mechagodzilla. Ren Serizawa was central to the story and had a definitive villain arc. Kong and Godzilla were drawn into war as a result of this chaos, mostly because of the Orca Z, and Mothra's rebirth occurred with her twins during a post-credits scene. Eventually, this script was radically altered during production, stripping it to its bare bones, changing countless characters' backstories and motivations, losing major key cast members, and dropping almost all connections to Godzilla King of the Monsters. The final film took its shape under the guidance of Adam Wingard. Wingard's goal was to make what he calls dense entertainment, a film that moved at a breezy pace and was built for rewatches, one that wasn't overly concerned with the broader cinematic universe, world building, or even plot mechanics. The film was meant to harken back to a simpler time in cinema, where viewers were transported off to action-packed worlds that came in under 2 hours, full of one-liners and massive explosions. Stuck in development hell and delayed multiple times by the global pandemic, Godzilla vs. Kong received the prestigious honor of being the film to reopen cinemas, dropping day and date in theaters and on HBO Max. The story begins somewhere on Skull Island, as Kong awakens for his morning routine. Agitated and knowing something's wrong, Kong uses uses a tree as a spear to pierce the sun, revealing he's trapped in a containment dome on Skull Island. His only companion is Gia, the last surviving member of the Iwi tribe, who is now being looked after by Monarch's Skull Island leader Eileen Andrews. The island has been destroyed by a massive storm, leaving this as Kong's last habitable space. Bernie Hayes, a conspiracy theorist podcaster who's been embedded in Apex cybernetics for years, steals documents on Apex's activities, believing they're up to no good. Godzilla appears and destroys the facility, revealing an enormous blinking mechanical eye. Madison Russell believes Godzilla's attack was motivated and not random, but she's dismissed by Mark, who is overwhelmed with the responsibility of leading Monarch through this crisis. Former Monarch geologist Nathan Lind is then approached by Walter Simmons and Ren Serizawa, the leads of Apex Cybernetics. Lind reveals his brother led a mission to Hollow Earth that got the entire crew killed upon entry, making Nathan a disgrace and essentially forcing him into hiding. Ren and Walter have vehicles capable of Hollow Earth travel and recruit Lind to lead a journey in search of a power source that will give Apex the ability to take on Godzilla. Lind convinces Monarch to help, securing Kong and transporting him to a Hollow Earth portal in Antarctica, believing Kong will instinctually lead them to the power source. Gia calms Kong during a storm, revealing Kong can understand sign language and has a unique bond with Gia and will listen to her. Meanwhile, Madison and her friend Josh track down Bernie and team with him in order to break into the Apex remains to search for clues. Godzilla appears at sea, attacking Kong's convoy, going to war with the military, and eventually King Kong himself. Kong holds his own fairly well, considering he was sedated and trapped in the middle of the ocean with nowhere to go. The two battle underwater and atop an aircraft carrier. Eventually, Godzilla is tricked into thinking Kong is dead and leaves. Team Godzilla discovers a secret lab under Apex and boards a transport vessel for skullcrawler eggs that takes them through an underground tunnel from Florida to Apex's headquarters in Hong Kong. Kong is airlifted to Antarctica and enters the portal after Gia tells him it's possible he has family inside. The Hollow Earth anti-gravity vehicles are launched and Team Kong makes it to the other side, discovering Hollow Earth isn't just a cave system but is instead a planet within the planet. They're attacked by titans called Warbats, with Kong defending them. Then they follow Kong on his instinctual journey. Team Godzilla learns Apex has built a Mechagodzilla meant to exterminate the titans and protect humanity. Operated by Ren Serizawa, Mechagodzilla kills an enormous skullcrawler. Kong then discovers his ancestral home, a massive temple built into a mountain. He discovers a royal axe made from the corpses of one of Godzilla's relatives. Kong then takes his place atop a throne in the kingdom. Team Godzilla learns that Apex is using Ghidorah's skull as a DNA computer that can telepathically link to another Ghidorah skull inside Mechagodzilla so that Ren can pilot Mechagodzilla without being inside it. Kong's axe randomly activates, and he places it in a circuit that draws energy from Hollow Earth's core. Simmons' daughter, Maya, scans the energy and sends it to Apex, where they use it to amplify Mechagodzilla's power. Godzilla arrives in Hong Kong, going on a rampage. Responding to Kong's axe, Godzilla uses his atomic breath like a drill to Hollow Earth, a feat that he pulls off in only minutes and somehow perfectly breaks through Kong's temple directly from the surface. Kong's temple is destroyed and Kong grabs the axe and jumps through the newly opened portal to the surface to take on Godzilla. The two battle in Hong Kong with a fantastic intro. The sequence is excitingly shot, well lit, and allows the monster fight to take the center stage. Unfortunately, after the 40 best seconds of fist-to-fist action ever put to screen between two monsters, the fight devolves into Godzilla chasing Kong around with his atomic breath until Kong uses the axe, charging it with Godzilla's atomic breath to knock Godzilla out, winning round 2. Round 3 kicks off with Kong tricking Godzilla and smashing him into a building. It ends only a minute later as Godzilla goes on the full offensive, overpowering Kong and stomping him into the ground, the clear winner between the two. Godzilla roars at Kong, expecting him to submit, but when Kong roars back at Godzilla, Godzilla seems to gain some respect for the ape and lets go. Kong passes out as Mechagodzilla activates. The robot is overrun with Hollow Earth energy, triggering the Ghidorah skull to merge with an AI, creating the villainous Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla kills Simmons, with Serizawa seemingly dying to electricity, and then erupts from a mountain, going on a rampage and destroying Hong Kong. Godzilla does his best to fight Mechagodzilla, but is perfectly countered at every move and constantly overpowered. Lind uses a heave to revive Kong, with Gia explaining that Kong needs to save Godzilla. The two titans team up to take on Mechagodzilla very briefly. Godzilla is knocked out and it becomes a 1v1 between King Kong and Mechagodzilla. Team Godzilla spills alcohol on a computer, buying Kong enough time for Godzilla to supercharge the axe, allowing him to chop Mechagodzilla into pieces. Kong then decapitates Mechagodzilla. After a brief rest, Godzilla appears, seemingly ready for round 4. Kong realizes Godzilla isn't looking for a fight and drops the axe. Godzilla then returns to sea, with the two of them seemingly having a truce. Kong moves to Hollow Earth, where he's free to live as king, happy and at peace for the first time since the movie started. Godzilla vs. Kong Kong is such a tricky film. On the one hand, this movie is an enormous mess. This is the only live-action installment to the MonsterVerse that you can pause any single scene and find countless plot holes or confusing details. Things as simple as, if Godzilla's attacking Apex looking for the eye, how did he never find it? It's amplifying a signal that's drawing him to it, and he even exposes it. Ghidorah found the orca with no trouble, so what gives here? The world building is incredibly sloppy. I could nitpick it for hours, but I'll save you the time by only going through a few key examples. Hollow Earth was discovered in the last film as a tunnel network inside of the planet. Now it's been dismissed by Monarch for some reason until they rediscover it as a planet within the planet, making the tunnel system Godzilla was using in the last film make no sense. Where did the second Ghidorah skull come from? In Godzilla King of the Monsters, the only one that survived the events of the film was the one decapitated off of Isla de Mara. If Jonah sold that one to Simmons, where did the second one inside of Mechagodzilla come from? The novelization says there's 2 Ghidorah skulls, and the movie says there's 2, but Wingard had to sheepishly admit that Bernie must be wrong about his theory, otherwise it's a continuity error during a Toho Kingdom interview. Mark Russell went from being an expert on Titan behavior, understanding firsthand when Godzilla, someone he hated, was warning Monarch about Ghidorah and decided to team with him, and someone who was constantly outsmarting every one of his peers when it came to the Titan's behaviors, yet here he dismisses Godzilla's actions in a single sentence. Mark isn't the only one acting out of character. This movie erases an entire cinematic universe's worth of development for Godzilla. We are 11 entries deep, and now, all of the sudden, Godzilla is no longer a noble warrior, there isn't a shred of him being the key to coexistence, that's not even brought up in the movie, and instead Godzilla's a racist who hates Kong because of his ancestors. Kong leaving the island doesn't disturb nature's balance in any single way. The island is already destroyed with Kong no longer needing to protect it. He's not using vital resources or destroying anything. Godzilla attacks him out of nowhere. The movie overcomplicates this, saying that it's because of an ancestral war between the two of them, or maybe it's because they're both Alpha Titans, a concept which this movie takes way too literally. The monsters bowing at the end of King of the Monsters was supposed to be more of a metaphor for them backing down from the fight from Godzilla and cementing him as the King of the Monsters. The MonsterVerse's over-reliance on alphas, a concept that doesn't actually exist in nature, is a little cringy and embarrassing at this point. Godzilla laughing and enjoying the fight with Kong comes out of nowhere, as does his disregard for humanity. Godzilla goes out of his way to avoid hurting people in the 2014 film and in King of the Monsters, only doing so when he had no other choice. Here, he deliberately kills the military transport and attacks bridges and rampages in Hong Kong. It's just very out of character, completely destroying the themes of the last movie, building to the key to coexistence. The world building in this movie is so sloppy that I've even had to overindulge some of the plot synopsis to help explain things that don't actually make much sense. It's almost impossible for the Godzilla fandom to discuss this movie without using evidence and examples as to what's going on inside this film from outside media, such as the novelizations, which aren't considered hard canon. People constantly refer back to interviews with Adam Wingard, the movie's commentary, or downright headcanon to explain things like the Hollow Earth energy source, the fate of Ren Serizawa, or how Godzilla could possibly lose to Mechagodzilla. This movie cared so little about integration into the MonsterVerse at large and organic world building that things like Kingdom Kong and Monarch Legacy of Monsters have had to work their butts off to explain why Skull Island was destroyed or how Apex could have built Mechagodzilla, who, as it stands, comes completely out of nowhere in this movie, along with everything else Apex does, such as their existence, the heaves, and their tunnel from one side of the planet to the next. As an entry of a cinematic universe, Godzilla vs. Kong is really frustrating. It hardly tries to connect to the world at large. This movie is a movie where things just kinda happen because they do. Characters' motivations and even the plot itself don't matter. They exist simply to get the viewer from one action sequence to the next. Massive portions of this film could have been removed with nothing changing. Characters' decisions almost never matter. Team Godzilla only exists to slow Mechagodzilla down for literal seconds. That is the only meaningful thing they accomplish in the entire movie, and if you recut that scene, you wouldn't even need them in the moment. Mark Russell and Ren Serizawa have nothing to do. Serizawa's connection to Dr. Serizawa from the previous movies isn't even addressed. He's a glorified background character with less than 10 lines of dialogue and accomplishes nothing meaningful during the film's runtime, and then he dies. He's just another symbol of this movie's abandonment of the lore and world building which was done previously, a shining example of this movie's missed potential. A great sequel builds upon the themes of the previous movie in meaningful ways. It develops the world organically with carryovers from the films prior that reward viewers for sticking with the series. Godzilla vs. Kong does not do this. It doesn't have any meaningful themes to develop at all. It's possible to view this movie as a story about letting go of pride and ego or letting go of past hatred, but Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, a direct sequel to this movie from the same creative team, undoes the ending of this movie by showing Godzilla still Hates Kong. This movie is the first MonsterVerse movie without anything to say. It doesn't even attempt. This movie compromises the themes of the previous films and only exists for one purpose: spectacle. When viewed as an installment of an ongoing cinematic universe, Godzilla vs. Kong falters. Where it succeeds is as a standalone film. While I believe a great movie rewards viewers for engaging in the material, this film proves a movie can still be pretty good for doing the opposite. If you watch this movie the way it's intended to be viewed, it is a fantastic time. A true classic turn your brain off popcorn flick. Godzilla vs. Kong knew what it wanted to do and did it very well, prioritizing spectacle over story. The film develops King Kong in deep and interesting ways that root him as the central protagonist and make the movie all about his journey. It's incredibly exciting to watch him develop and come into his own. Kong's connection to Gia is the core of this movie, grounding it in relatable emotions of friendship and bonding. The movie is at its peak when it's telling King Kong's story. His quieter character moments all stand out very well. Kong embracing his ancestral lineage and becoming king is a moment I will never forget. Kong is also elevated here, now possessing intelligent thought never before seen with this character, even going as far as to allow him to speak in ways that doesn't feel forced or out of place. Wingard accomplishes what he wanted. This movie is as fast as possible while not feeling too overwhelming. Viewers never have to sit long before something exciting happens. Godzilla turning heel is so fun to watch. While it doesn't vibe with the character so far, his attack against Apex in the military, they're so classic that you can't help but smile. The fights with Kong are rapid, throwing out the physics of the universe and doing away with the monstrous fighting style developed previously in favor of wrestling moves, which is a little less interesting, but it still somehow works pretty well. The action sequences are instantly iconic and carry lots of intensity as a result of you engaging in Kong's journey. The film's pretty clear from the start about who's going to win. They say it within the first few minutes, but that doesn't take away from the enjoyment of seeing these two icons smash into each other and doesn't ruin your ability to want Kong to win. In many ways, this movie feels like a reboot of the MonsterVerse itself. While it was meant to cap off Phase 1, the radical shift in priorities behind the scenes make this movie feel like a fresh jumping off point. The tonal adjustment which was made to this movie, making things sillier than they have ever been in the live-action MonsterVerse so far, and throwing out the realism of all installments prior, this movie set the stage for projects like Skull Island and Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, and feels more cohesive with those than it does with what came before. Its true biggest issue is its lack of confidence in itself. Characters are constantly pointing out how stupid the plot is, which doesn't fix the plot they're making fun of, it just draws attention to it. I think this was done so viewers know the filmmakers are on their side, but it feels more like they just weren't confident in their ideas and were trying to make up for that. This can be seen no better than with the title of the movie itself. For a movie called Godzilla vs. Kong, this movie really didn't live up to 60 years worth of hype leading into the rematch as it should have. Godzilla and Kong's fights are actually really short. The sequences themselves are drawn out, but the actual combat is very brief. They're also clearly too afraid to pick a definitive winner, forcing Mechagodzilla into this movie, distracting from runtime that could have been used to build the world, characters, or to see Godzilla and Kong actually throw down. This is made more frustrating by the next film, where they still don't get along and repeat the same plot beat of having to team up after a fight against a bigger threat. Just save it for the sequel in that case. This doesn't undo how awesome it is to see the two of them fight side by side and how epic it is to see King Kong fight Mechagodzilla, but it does prove they weren't confident in the premise of King Kong and Godzilla fighting to carry a movie. Maybe this one should have been called Godzilla x Kong in the first place, taking the weight of expectations away and allowing for them to tell the story they did. Godzilla vs. Kong is such a mixed bag. On the one hand, the movie drives me crazy with sloppy world building, bad continuity, rough characterization, and horrible plagiarized music that accompanies Godzilla, which rips off Akira Ifukube so closely it feels like a downright insult. On the other hand, I really love the film. It's fun and exciting and delivers so many iconic scenes. Team Kong is great, with Gia standing out as one of the best characters in the MonsterVerse. The film develops Kong in ways that elevate him as a character and allow for so much potential moving forward. The action is all top-notch with wonderful cinematography from Ben Sirison. The fight choreography is, at times, better than it's ever been in a Godzilla film. Kong's music from Junkie XL is kick-ass, as is the Hollow Earth, which breaks the universe but has so much potential. This movie is constantly trying new things and pushing boundaries in ways I really appreciate. And best of all, it worked. Adam Wingard's plan to create dense entertainment worked. This movie moves so fast that it holds up very well upon rewatches, so long as you aren't thinking about what's happening. If you need an escape from reality, this is your best choice. It offers a fun, exciting, and mentally relaxing break from the stressful world we live in. I would gladly recommend Godzilla vs. Kong to any King Kong, Godzilla, or MonsterVerse fan, or fan of 80s or 90s action films who are willing to turn their brains off and have a good time. Godzilla x Kong the Hunted is the prequel comic tie-in to Godzilla x Kong the New Empire. The comic attempts to be the first immediate prequel, leading directly into the events of the succeeding film. The comic was written by Brian Buccellato, returning from Godzilla Fight or Flight. This is the first MonsterVerse comic to combine a Godzilla and a King Kong narrative. As part of this fusion, the book features art by Drew Edward Johnson, returning from Godzilla Aftershock and Godzilla Dominion, collaborating with Zid, returning from Skull Island: The Birth of Kong and Kingdom Kong. This comic features additional artwork by Dario Formasani with a cover by Christian Ward. The story begins in 2027 as King Kong goes about his daily life in Hollow Earth. He's attacked by a spine prowler, which he defeats and sends retreating. The Titan unknowingly runs into a trap set up by Raymond Martin, an architect turned big game hunter who sedates the kaiju and has it sent to the surface. Godzilla responds to an unknown signal on an oil rig, which enrages him and causes him to blow it up. Bernie Hayes covers the event live as it happens on his podcast. Turns out Godzilla was lured to the area using a radiation decoy set up by Martin, who has turned his AM construction company into a warehouse for the superspecies corpses that he has hunted on Skull Island. Kong explores a cave in Hollow Earth and discovers a series of cave paintings depicting different creatures fighting amongst each other. One shows Godzilla battling an ice dragon, which will be revealed as Shimo in the next film. Martin triggers another radiation decoy on the surface, luring Godzilla away from his facility while he boots up his Titan Hunter mech, which he's built to help him kill Titans. The radiation decoy winds up luring Scylla to India, where she mistakes it for a nuclear power plant melting down. The Titan Hunter is tested against the Spine Prowler, making quick work of it. Scylla battles the Air Force and then attacks the power plant and feasts upon both its nuclear cores as Bernie covers the event on his podcast. News reports of the event cause Martin to flashback to 2014, where it's revealed his entire family was killed by the female Muto during G-Day and he was left permanently disfigured, with a hatred for Titans. Godzilla responds to the attack in India, too late to stop Scylla, and is enraged by the damage. Over the next week, Godzilla tracks Scylla across the globe as she attacks sources of radiation in the UK and Italy. Bernie theorizes she's either prepping to reproduce or planning to go to war with Godzilla. Godzilla arrives in Italy, appearing off the coast, but not following on land. Martin transports the Titan Hunter to Hollow Earth, using his construction company's contract to build Monarch's Hollow Earth facilities as cover, and begins his hunt. Martin first kills a warbat and then a skir buffalo. Kong realizes something is wrong and heads out to investigate. Martin then follows the tracks of a spine prowler, which this comic has a big continuity error with, as it treats this as the first time anybody's ever come in contact with the spine prowler, despite us seeing Kong and Martin fight one earlier in the comic. Martin follows the tracks to two baby spine prowlers and is attacked by their mother. On the surface, Scylla begins a rampage in Rome. Godzilla appears off the coast and the two square off, with their battle to be continued in Godzilla x Kong the New Empire. Kong arrives at the transport Martin is using to bring his Titan corpses to the surface. He goes on a rampage, destroying everything, and then takes off to find Martin. The spine prowler is killed as she impales herself on the Titan Hunter's back. Before he can kill the babies, Kong appears to defend them. The Titan Hunter gets the first shot in, but Kong easily overpowers it. Taking a sucker punch to the face, Kong suplexes the Titan Hunter off a cliff, catching it as it falls. Martin rages about how unfair it is that Kong beat him, and Kong decides to let him plummet off the cliff, exploding at the bottom. The baby spine prowlers then go to eat Martin in revenge as Kong heads off on his next adventure. Of the MonsterVerse comics, The Hunted manages to be the fastest read. Lots of the story is told without any narration or dialogue. The comic is a breezy, action-driven narrative that places the kaiju at the forefront of the story. Split between two narratives that start connected and then grow apart, the Godzilla and Kong plots are both done pretty decent. The comic's biggest issue is with the Titan Hunter plotline and with its continuity. Martin is a very flimsy character. His motivations to hunt the Titans don't really make sense. Martin knows the Titan Hunter can't exterminate larger threats like Godzilla or Scylla, and so he chooses to hunt weaker Titans in Hollow Earth. But the entire reason he does so is because he has a hatred for the larger Titans on the surface, like the Muto that killed his family. How a random architect was able to build a functioning radiation decoy that could trick Godzilla, and how that same person could build a mech that can kill Titans for less than $1 billion is beyond me. The entire comic is full of paper-thin writing like this. It took Apex Cybernetics 10 years with loads of data, research, and the world's best scientists to create Mechagodzilla, and yet a random man could do this on his own. It breaks the universe in so many ways. Bernie's entire plotline is similarly clunky. While Godzilla chasing Scylla around the world is exciting, how Bernie is able to stay up to date with what's happening with real-time, accurate, top-secret intel is never addressed. The comic doesn't even tie in well with Godzilla Kong the New Empire. Scylla's global rampage isn't addressed in the movie, which acts like Rome is her first attack and Godzilla awakens to stop it. The comic hardly explains why Godzilla is so aggressive towards Scylla either. Bernie offers two separate and equally likely scenarios as to what's what's going on, but the comic never explains which is correct. It's a strange way to offer solutions while not committing to an answer. The comic has reused scenarios from the film as well, like mentioning World War III, or having a Titan do a suplex, or having Kong catch someone from falling off a cliff. The Kong story doesn't even match up to the movie a little bit. The comic depicts Kong battling the Titan Hunter at the same time Godzilla is fighting Scylla, but in the film, the Titan Hunter is never mentioned or addressed, and Godzilla doesn't fight Scylla until after Kong goes on his dog hunt. Godzilla Kong the Hunted harkens back to the earliest days of the MonsterVerse comics, where studio mandates to have the comics be a prequel to the upcoming film that would release before the movie lead to a lack of quality control and a slew of issues. The story and dialogue are shaky, and the world building hasn't been this bad since Godzilla Awakening, but the comics still does have some redeeming quality. The breezy story is great for younger readers, helped by the action-driven narrative, and the action is quite exciting. Kong's life in Hollow-Earth is great to see, with his isolated story working very well, removing the context around the Titan Hunter. Kong's characterized great, showcasing his softer and more curious side while also showing that he retains his noble duty to protect innocence and will throw down if needed. Godzilla's story is very similar. Scylla retains her hunger compulsions, leading to a rampage, pulling in Godzilla to try and stop her. Godzilla tracking her down and then battling her feels right out of the King of the Monsters era. Because we're not following Godzilla too closely, his characterization has been restored to its pre-Godzilla vs. Kong status, which is greatly appreciated. This comic is topped off with the second best artwork of any of the MonsterVerse Godzilla comics after Fight or Flight. Zid's creative paneling is always wonderful to see, as is his coloring, use of film geography, and mostly photoreal visuals. It's hard to know which artist contributed what to this comic, but one thing is certain. The apparent visual references that have been done for Godzilla in certain panels or Kong in others leads to the characters going off model or appearing very awkward and distracting at times. This issue feels consistent with Aftershock and Dominion, weighing the entire book down. I can't help but feel Zid's artwork has been dragged down throughout the entire read. The Hunted has a serviceable human story as long as you can overlook the horrible world building, and a thrilling kaiju story. The comic is well paced and exciting and does a good surface level job of building up the rivalry between Scylla and Godzilla for the film. The Kong story doesn't match up to the movie at all, but it does work well on its own. The artwork is pretty solid, with some wonderful visuals and some subpar moments. It's a shame this comic is plagued with continuity errors, bad writing, and doesn't flow as well into the films as it should. Overall, I would only recommend Godzilla Kong the Hunted to younger fans of the MonsterVerse or to hardcore fans who want to engage in as much of this content as they can. It's not needed to enjoy the film and doesn't really help to flesh anything in that movie out at all, but it might enrich your experience of watching that movie in some small ways. Following the success of Godzilla vs. Kong, Legendary saw the potential for King Kong in particular. Son of Kong went into immediate development with director Adam Wingard helping shape the project. At some point, Son of Kong was merged with the potential Godzilla idea, and Godzilla Kong: The New Empire quickly became the film it is today. In many ways, this is the first direct sequel in the MonsterVerse, as it's the first of these films to be done by a returning creative team continuing their vision directly. The story begins in 2027, as Kong finds himself settled into his lonely life in Hollow-Earth. His desire for companionship leads him to explore deeper in hopes of finding more of his kind. Meanwhile, Godzilla is hard at work on the surface, resuming his job as the King of the Monsters, where we find him battling Scylla to the death. A sinkhole opens in Kong's hunting grounds, leading to a Hollow-Earth within Hollow-Earth somehow. At the same time, a signal is activated that scrambles Monarch systems and strikes Geo with psychic visions of danger to come. A dangerous Titan emerges from the sinkhole and destroys Monarch's outpost. Seeking help understanding these developments, Eileen Andrews recruits Burning Haze into Monarch. Monarch launches an investigation team into Hollow-Earth. Godzilla attacks a nuclear power plant in France and absorbs all its radiation to supercharge. Kong explores the second Hollow-Earth, called the Subterranean Realm, where he immediately encounters a baby ape. Kong's then ambushed by multiple other apes and easily defeats them. He finds the child, who is never named on screen, but is called Suko in all out-of-film material. Kong instantly bonds with the child, who for some reason doesn't run away like the others, and the two set off. The exploration team ventures further into Hollow-Earth, following Gia's directions as she senses the signal that leads them to old Iwi temple remains and a living membrane that protects an Iwi civilization in Hollow-Earth. Despite Suko trying to get Kong killed, the two bond over a shared meal. Godzilla then attacks and kills Tiamat to absorb the radiation stockpiled in her home. The exploration crew is captured by the Iwi, who lead them to their temple and reveal they're the ones who signaled Monarch and Godzilla to war. Eileen discovers an Iwi prophecy that warns of the rise of Scar King, Godzilla's millionth-old rival who he fought in another Great Titan War and imprisoned in a fiery realm in Hollow-Earth. At the same time, Kong follows Suko to his home. the kingdom of Scar King. Scar King shows up and laughs at Kong before killing Zuko's guardian. Kong challenges Scar and the two have a very brief but highly entertaining fight. After Kong gets some good hits in, Scar King unleashes his secret weapon, an enormous ancient titan called Shimo that he rules through pain using a magic crystal. Shimo freezes Kong's arm and forces him to retreat without his axe. Eileen finishes reading the prophecy, which tells of Shimo and how an Iwi from Skull Island will awaken Mothra to help Godzilla in his rematch. Zuko helps save Kong from Scar King's ape army, and the two make their way to the Iwi kingdom because somehow Kong could sense Gia was there. Godzilla erupts from Tiamat's lair, evolved into a more powerful form. Monarch veterinarian Trapper equips Kong with a robotic glove, Monarch built to help enhance him after his fight with Mechagodzilla. The glove helps Kong and Gia asks him to get help for the upcoming fight. Immediately understanding what she means and knowing exactly where to go and what to do, Kong jumps through a portal he's never seen before and arrives in Egypt, where he roars to get Godzilla's attention. Godzilla, who was just in the North Pole one scene ago, now finds himself in Gibraltar. He hears Kong's roar and jumps into action, ready to fight to the death. Gia climbs a crystal pyramid and sticks her hand in the air, somehow materializing Mothra in the process. Mothra then takes off to the surface after Kong, apparently bringing Gia with her somehow. Godzilla shows up and goes for the kill as Kong tries to get help. Kong barely fights back, only losing his temper once, momentarily gaining the upper hand. Before Godzilla can kill Kong, Mothra appears and stops them. Godzilla and Gia have a moment for some reason, and then Godzilla gives a brief look at Mothra and follows her to Hollow Earth. As the final battle between Godzilla, Kong, Shimo, and Scar King kick off, the Iwi collide two crystal pyramids, disrupting gravity and sending everybody flying through the air. Godzilla goes crazy, taking down Scar King's apes and attacking Shimo as Mothra webs up apes and saves the Monarch crew. The gravity comes back online and the main titans fall through a portal to Rio. The battle continues until Godzilla breaks Scar King's whip. Zuko takes Kong's axe to the surface and uses it to destroy Scar King's crystal, freeing Shimo. Shimo freezes Scar King, and Kong destroys his frozen corpse. The movie ends with Gia choosing to stay with Eileen rather than the Iwi. Mothra stays with the Iwi and helps repair their village as Godzilla returns to Rome, finding a new home in the Colosseum. Kong takes Shimo as his new pet and rides her back to the Ape Kingdom, with his newly adopted son Zuko, where they liberate their fellow apes. GXK has many of the same strengths and weaknesses of Godzilla vs. Kong. Many people agree that the film minimizes what doesn't work and amplify what does, but for me, this movie does the opposite. New Empire's greatest strengths are its ideas. The film is loaded with amazing concepts, from giving Kong a son to having him liberate the apes. Unfortunately, this movie doesn't earn any of it. Even more so than Godzilla vs. Kong, this is a movie where things just kinda happen because they do. From the collapse in gravity, which isn't given any explanation, to the Iwi signal, everything just occurs. There are constant plot holes, both small and massive. From Eileen using a single security camera to recover footage from a bunch of security cameras, to Scar King's control of Shimo, nothing makes sense and no attempt is even made to make things make sense. The backstories are all exposition vomit with no setup. The Iwi, being from Hollow Earth, is a major retcon from Kong's Skull Island, and there's no sense of earned history between the titans in the film. Scar King's reaction to two titans blasting through a portal coming at him ready to kill him provides for two shots that people read into like no one's business to try and force an implied emotional connection between Scar King and Godzilla to fit their horrible backstory. The same can be said with Godzilla's underwhelming interactions with Mothra in this movie. It's impossible for this fandom to discuss this film on its own merits without involving information from outside materials like interviews, the novelization, or even headcanon. Explaining Godzilla's aggressive behavior, the Iwi Society, Mothra, or Scar King and Shimo's histories with the other titans isn't Greg Keyes' job. It's this film's job. Ignoring outside materials and focusing on this movie as is, because that's what the filmmakers do, this barely works as a cohesive and satisfying narrative. This can be seen no better than with Mothra. While the original script for GXK featured Mothra, she was written out and replaced with a different titan until late into post-production. This results in her reintroduction into the film being the downright sloppiest thing to ever happen in this cinematic universe. Every line where a character mentions her is ADR'd. Her mural constantly flickers between Mothra and the original titan depending on whose angle we're seeing. She appears out of thin air without any explanation or established relationship to the Mothra from King of the Monsters, and she doesn't even add much value to the movie overall, being incredibly underutilized and never teaming up with Godzilla and Kong properly. The entire Iwi prophecy Eileen reads leads makes up the 2 worst scenes ever written in the MonsterVerse and leads to the sloppiest plot of the entire series. GXK isn't a movie that's trying to make sense. Kong stumbles into Zuko and the apes immediately because the story needed him to. Zuko sort of bonds with him right away again because the story needs him to, despite Kong using Zuko as a weapon seconds earlier in a move that is completely out of character for him. Characters also teleport all over the planet just because. The gang leaves the Heave 2 miles away from the ridge, where they discover the ancient temple. They then travel many more miles to get to the current Iwi kingdom, where Kong randomly discovers them because he can sense Jia somehow. Trapper is then able to get back to the Heave so that he can get Kong the glove to heal him in what seems like only a few minutes, considering Scar King's advance has barely made it anywhere in that time. The worst example is Godzilla teleporting from the North Pole to Gibraltar and then from Gibraltar to Egypt in only a matter of minutes. Is it because he uses Hollow Earth tunnels to travel? Not according to Godzilla vs. Kong, which displays a scan of Earth repeated in this film, which reveals no such tunnels exist. There are only gates to Hollow Earth proper. Godzilla travels 2,800 miles in minutes because he needed to for the story to work. Not that viewers unfamiliar with geography would realize this, as the film makes it seem like they're only a few miles apart already. And why is it that Godzilla only now needs to evolve for war? Was Ghidorah not a big enough threat? The hyper-stylistic action displayed in this film shows Godzilla far faster, more agile, and more powerful at the start of this film than he's ever been before. His evolution doesn't accomplish anything he couldn't do earlier in this movie. He still gets knocked down by the Beast Glove and then doesn't use any of his new abilities for anything. He supercharges to attack Scar King in the end, but misses the entire time. When he does graze Scar King with his super beam, it does less damage than his normal breath did to Kong. That's not because Scar King is stronger than Kong either. Scar King would have been beaten by Kong in a weaponless fight, as demonstrated earlier. Much like the plot, even the action in this film just sort of happens. New Empire is unfortunately filled with missed potential. It takes great ideas that could have been developed meaningfully and squishes them into a film that moves at whiplash pacing. Coming in at an hour and 46 minutes without credits, GXK is the shortest MonsterVerse film that tries to do the most. Everything Godzilla does in this movie feels incredibly rushed, out of place, and distracts from runtime, which should have been used to develop Scar King, who doesn't show up until 60% of the way through the film's runtime without credits. Mothra's inclusion feels like an afterthought to an afterthought. She only shares the screen for one single shot with both Godzilla and Kong, and her placement is incredibly underwhelming and leaves the final image feeling poorly crafted. Much like with Godzilla vs. Kong, while the action sequences tend to last for a while, the combat is very brief. Kong and Scar King's fight could have been one of the best sequences in the entire King Kong franchise. Instead, it's over in a few seconds. The anti-gravity battle had so much potential to be a fun, silly camp fest, but it goes by so quickly that it's only truly exciting for one single Godzilla moment, and the fight in Rio is mostly just chasing each other around or tackling one another without any true stakes or sense of danger or consequences or weight. Godzilla and Kong don't even really team up properly because they're split between 2 opponents. Their fight with Mechagodzilla featured more combo moves than this movie does, which only has 2 in the entire movie. Godzilla and Kong don't even meet until less than 20 minutes of the film are left. Kong is then sidelined during the final battle as he's stuck with Shimo trying to freeze his glove for way too long. If Shimo can freeze his arm and Scar King in only a matter of seconds, how can she not freeze the glove? The biggest shame is that this movie is filled with ideas that are good. The characters work so hard to redeem this film. The human cast is all delightful. While they aren't given much to do beyond just progress the story through random occurrences and conveniences, they're very charming. Everyone does a wonderful job and the cast is kept pretty small, which allows for time to develop their personalities. King Kong is the main character and his support is Zuko. The 2 of them bond way too quickly, but it's a great story with amazing moments. This should have been way more of the movie. Scar King steals the show. His pure evil personality was so fun to watch. His mannerisms made him incredibly unique and his fighting style helped him to stand out against the other MonsterVerse villains. Zuko being pulled between King Kong and Scar King is what this movie should have been. All 3 characters should have interacted way more. When people talk about what works in this film, this is what they're talking about. With more time, there could have been some good character exploration or themes unpacked as well. Many of the people who claim this movie has something to say argue it's a story about redemption, as a lonely man saves an abused child from a ruthless dictator. But those aren't themes. That's not the movie having anything to say. That's the plot. That's what the film is literally about. Spending more time with this plot is a rich goldmine for potential thematic weight and exploration that could have elevated this movie. As is, Godzilla, Shimo, and Mothra were all incredibly wasted in this film and were only here for marketing purposes. I truly believe that they should have stuck to their guns and made Son of Kong properly. Even if the Iwi plotline and Mothra were included, having Mothra and Kong team up against Scar King and the apes is more than enough to sell this film. There are are so many other issues with Godzilla Kong: The New Empire that I could get into, but I won't. These issues don't get in the way of the movie if you watch it the way it's intended to be viewed. While the original goal for the MonsterVerse was to tell sophisticated stories with Godzilla to redeem him from his persona as a children's icon, this movie is custom built for kids and works perfectly in that regard. And while I believe that a great movie doesn't require you to turn your brain off, this is a fast-paced adventure film with fun locations, exciting characters, silly moments, and good action. The movie is the ultimate sleepover film for you and your friends to watch in 5th grade on a Friday night with pizza and soda, and I truly appreciate it for that. While this film is incredibly flawed, it's still super charming. Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is a sloppy mess that feels like two films brundle-flied into one. With nauseating pacing, a translucently thin plot, bad geography, no true thematic weight, semi-underwhelming action, and only 2 really iconic shots, this movie doesn't achieve its full potential at all. Further weighed down by annoying sound design and obnoxious music that's overly loud and chaotic and often plagiarizes either Akira Ifukube's Godzilla theme or Yuji Koseki's Mothra theme, this film still manages to have so much value. The VFX might be the weakest of the MonsterVerse, but they are used for wonderful purposes. The New Empire is an exploration of King Kong's character that takes him to places well beyond his original conception. Kong's dynamic with Tsuko, Scar King, and even Godzilla is amazing. The movie underutilizes his connection to Gia, completely ignoring what made both characters work so well in the previous film, but sort of makes up for it by pairing Kong with Tsuko for such long stretches. GXK is at its strongest when it's telling the story of King Kong trying to liberate his people. The film rises above its flaws and stands out as an enjoyable, monster-centric action film that harkens back to childhood and what it was like to watch movies as a kid. I really appreciate this film on so many levels. Most of all, I love its attempt to do new things, even when they don't land. Even if it doesn't achieve its full potential, pairing Godzilla, King Kong, and Mothra together is enough for any kaiju fan on its own. I would strongly recommend Godzilla Kong: The New Empire to younger viewers, parents, hardcore kaiju fans, and adventure fans who don't mind turning their brains off and having a good time. In 1954, the world's second cinematic universe was born with the release of Godzilla. Over the next 2 decades, Toho would release nearly 30 films that fell under the umbrella of the Showa series, a loosely connected universe of characters who would cross over from one film to the next, all centering around the King of the Monsters. While the more popular English dubs of these films erased all continuity between each entry, creating a series of standalone monster flicks, the Japanese originals had a fairly solid grasp on the world's history, primarily rooted in the Godzilla series. 60 years later, in the year 2014, Legendary and Warner Bros. Released Godzilla in hopes of launching an isolated trilogy. The success of the film, as well as their recent acquisition of a pseudo-King Kong 2005 prequel script, birthed the MonsterVerse as we know it. Over the next 10 years, the MonsterVerse would sort of follow in the footsteps of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which inspired it in the first place. The idea was to build a universe centered around Godzilla and King Kong and have it blossom into a series of interconnected spin-offs. In addition to the films, Legendary would release a series of comic books and now television tie-ins to build the lore of the universe. The story primarily begins in 1952 as the Monarch organization is founded in response to a potential giant monster sighting during World War II. The core trio at the center of the organization is born that year as Bill Randa, Keiko Mira, and Lee Shaw meet and begin discovering massive unidentified terrestrial organisms across the globe. In 1954, Godzilla is awakened and revealed to the US military during the Castle Bravo bomb test. Monarch sees a major expansion through the early 60s until a series of disasters tarnish their name and lead Bill Randa down a dark path. In 1973, Randa saves Monarch from collapse by leading an expedition to Skull Island, which reveals a whole world of monsters and myths come alive. The most prominent is an apex predator named Kong. Over the next few years, Monarch slowly expands into a shadowy organization. In the early 90s, 2 separate trips occur to Skull Island, one by complete accident, which leaves a bunch of ordinary people stranded on the island. The other was led by prominent Monarch member Houston Brooks' son, Aaron. In the late 90s, a Muto nest is unearthed, leading to a catastrophe in Japan. In 2014, the Muto nest hatches and a winged kaiju begins a global rampage, pursued by Godzilla. A second Muto hatches and all 3 converge in San Francisco in the event known as G-Day. In the immediate aftermath, a third Muto, the parent of the other 2, is awakened and begins a secluded rampage of its own. Godzilla stops it with aid by Monarch's Emma Russell and her Titan communication device, the Orca. A year later, Bill Randa's grandchildren discover their family legacy, teaming with Lee Shaw and unearthing a series of hidden titans and portals to an unknown underworld. Shaw's attempts to close the portals lead to the discovery of a hidden realm, called Axis Mundi, which exists between the world of the surface and the world of the titans. During the chaos, Monarch is exposed to the public. In 2019, the government attempts to seize control of Monarch to exterminate the titans. This results in Emma Russell teaming with eco-terrorists and releasing King Ghidorah, a rival to Godzilla who fell from the stars and seeks to destroy the planet. Ghidorah causes a mass awakening, unleashing all the titans at once. Godzilla and Mothra team up to stop Ghidorah and Rodan, leading to the death of Mothra and Godzilla becoming the king of the monsters. Over the next few weeks, Godzilla defends the planet by breaking up fights between titans and stopping global chaos to the best of his ability. A few years later, Monarch plans to explore the world of the titans, hidden inside our own, called the Hollow Earth. They prepare entry through Skull Island, but wind up causing environmental damage that destroys the island's ecosystem and unleashes a dangerous titan, Camazotz, that Kong has to defeat. In 2024, Godzilla goes on a rampage, and a fleet of fighter pilots responds, with one named Tyler letting his partners die because he likes Godzilla too much to fight him. Godzilla's rampage seemingly continues as he attacks a convoy transporting Kong to a Hollow Earth portal so he can have a new home. Despite Godzilla's best efforts to kill Kong, he makes it to Hollow Earth and settles down nicely. Godzilla has none of it, challenging Kong to war. The two battle, with Godzilla proving to be too powerful for Kong to defeat. Godzilla's rampage is then revealed to be an attempt to stop Apex Cybernetics from completing a Mechagodzilla, meant to kill Godzilla and replace him. Godzilla loses the fight miserably, and Kong has to step in to save him. The two Alpha Titans team up to take Mechagodzilla down and then resume their lives, with Godzilla on the surface and Kong in Hollow Earth. In 2027, a construction worker builds a second mech and begins to hunt in Hollow Earth, trying to kill the Titans. His actions awaken the Titan Scylla, who Godzilla stalks across the globe. Kong puts an end to the Titan Hunter and scavenges for food, causing a sinkhole to open up, releasing Godzilla's millionth-old rival Scar King. Godzilla kills Scylla and then goes on a warpath, trying to supercharge as Kong meets a baby ape and starts to bond with it. The baby, named Suko, takes Kong to his home, the kingdom of Scar King. Godzilla and Kong are forced to team up, with Godzilla needing persuasion from a newly rebirthed Mothra to join the fight. The Titans go to war in Hollow Earth, with their battle spilling into Rio, where Godzilla, Kong, and Suko free Scar King's allied Titan he keeps as a slave, Shimo. Shimo then aids the heroes in taking down Scar King, and everyone seems pretty chill with one another. Mothra becomes the protector of the Hollow Earth natives, Godzilla remains on the surface, and Kong liberates the Ape Kingdom. The MonsterVerse is a super interesting universe. Unlike the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there is no guiding hand behind the series to make things cohesive. This leads to the entire series being a revolving door of ideas as one filmmaker steps in and then is shifted out and replaced with another. While this leads to the films all feeling very fresh, it does cause the world at hand to be hardly coherent. The original arc was planned out from Kong Skull Island to Godzilla vs. Kong. This helped make the first 4 films feel like a proper Phase 1. Unfortunately, Godzilla vs. Kong is where things started to fall apart. The MonsterVerse never felt obligated to its comic tie-ins, with the very first ever written, Godzilla Awakening, having so many continuity issues it was ignored by filmmakers since day one. That's because the comics are all written after the films have been shot, but before they've been edited. This leads to them never melding into the universe in meaningful ways and often being contradicted by the movies themselves. Even still, King of the Monsters director Michael Dougherty genuinely cared about the world building of the universe. He included subtle references to the comics, and the world building done in his film was the most complete and comprehensive ever seen for this universe. He made countless attempts to set up where things were heading with Godzilla vs. Kong and created what many consider to be the peak of the MonsterVerse. His big ideas were a world of potential that could be capitalized on in countless spin-offs and sequels. Radical shifts in priority followed as Godzilla vs. Kong saw countless revisions and wound up a Frankenstein story full of different people's ideas. This undid the world building of King of the Monsters and, in many ways, counteracted the entire purpose of the MonsterVerse leading up to that point. The comics that followed became rushed attempts to fix the sloppy world building of the following film, which ignored all the setups that had been done for it by the time it reached its final form. In many ways, Godzilla vs. Kong feels like a reboot of the MonsterVerse itself. Phase 2 officially kicked off with Skull Island, a TV show so loosely connected to the universe at large with so many continuity issues that it seems like the studio might straight up ignore it and never release the second season to cap off the massive cliffhanger at the ending of the first. Monarch Legacy of Monsters followed. This show does its best to connect to the films, but proves definitively that Legendary has never considered the comics all that important. While Dougherty may have viewed the comics and even the King of the Monsters novelization as canon, the filmmakers that followed do not have that commitment. This has led to a shattered fanbase, which constantly argues about what the proper version of events are. And while Legacy of Monsters doesn't technically create create too many issues with canon, completely ignoring the comics one way or the other, it's the most divisive entry so far and will require a second season to help fix some of the bigger unanswered questions. Godzilla Kong the New Empire made a small attempt to tie into the comics by including Tiamat, first introduced in Godzilla Dominion. Some fans take this as vindication for their loyalty to the books. Others see it for what it is. Legendary already having a Titan design ready for them for the films, and so they could cherry pick it from the comics to pretend those comics matter, all the while knowing that there's no series bible for continuity in this universe, and that the filmmakers most likely won't read the comics anyways. The sloppy world building gets even worse here, with the universe now resembling the Showa series of loose continuity and barely explained plot threads. It's made much better if fans acknowledge the sad truth. The expanded universe is a separate and parallel MonsterVerse for us fans to enjoy by ourselves. The comics and novelizations all work fairly cohesively on their own. They run into issues in the context of the live-action installments. The films and TV shows, with the exception of Skull Island, work much better without them. While the MonsterVerse was very coherent, starting with Godzilla 2014 and going through Godzilla King of the Monsters, it unraveled incredibly quickly because there is no series bible to keep things on track. The lack of any solid plan for where things are heading leads to each entry post King of the Monsters feeling more like a film series treading water until it goes under, rather than meaningful entries leading to a satisfying conclusion. Even with its major flaws, the MonsterVerse has one thing going for it that other cinematic universes don't. Each entry is a really solid standalone story. The films are the strongest parts of the universe, and each one is very good in its own right. If the MonsterVerse had to devolve into a Showa series counterpart full of tonal shifts, sloppy world building, and chaotic mayhem, at least it did it in style. Every single MonsterVerse film has been very entertaining. While I do feel the quality is slipping dramatically, projects like Monarch Legacy of Monsters give me hope that things can get back on track. My hope for this universe is to see it become more coherent and meaningful, like it was in the King of the Monsters era. The MonsterVerse is at an incredibly exciting precipice. With new spin-offs on the way and another film installment coming soon with fresh talent involved, I couldn't be more excited. While I'd love to see Adam Wingard return someday to complete his trilogy, I can't wait to see where things go next. I would also love to see the quality control improve on the comics so they don't feel like rushed cash grabs and instead feel like organic expansions of the world. The MonsterVerse has been so much fun, and going on this journey has been incredibly exciting. This has become one of my all-time favorite Godzilla continuities, and I'm so grateful for it. It's provided some of my favorite films ever made, and I couldn't be more thankful. I can't wait to see where things lead next. I would happily recommend this series to any filmgoers who are into action, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially giant monsters. Thank you so much for watching another episode of MonsterVerse May. What do you think of the entire MonsterVerse as a cohesive series? For me, I think it works fairly well, especially when you don't consider the comics or novelizations all that important, and even though in my opinion the storytelling has dropped in quality dramatically, I still love this universe so much. As the MonsterVerse has developed, there have been many non-canon expansions to the universe. These have come in many forms, from video games to books, and have helped solidify Legendary's Godzilla and Kong universe as a global brand with fantastic staying power. Today we'll discuss some of the more meaningful tie-ins to this universe and my thoughts on how they hold up. The most prominent form of MonsterVerse tie-in is video games. There have been lots of mobile games, console games, computer games, and even arcade games that relate to the MonsterVerse in one way or another. The very first released was Godzilla Smash 3 back in 2014. This was a free puzzle game for iOS and Android devices in the style of Candy Crush. While many have good memories of this game, admittedly the puzzle style was never for me. Even back at the time of the game's release, I never enjoyed playing it. At the same time, Godzilla Strike Zone was released for iOS and Android devices. This survival horror game takes place during the events of Godzilla. You play as Fort Brody, halo jumping into San Francisco. You try to escape Godzilla while rescuing civilians. It was a truly exciting game and helped build hype for the film. To this day, the potential for a big-budget survival horror game set in this style featuring Godzilla has still yet to be realized. With a wonderful concept and fun gameplay, this one is a fond memory for many fans. Just don't try to play it on your iPhone 4. It won't run well and you'll never make it past the first level. Over the next few years, there were countless Godzilla and Kong tie-ins and crossovers. The 2014 Godzilla's inclusion in the PS4 game was fantastic and might be my favorite game the MonsterVerse Godzilla has appeared in to date. In 2017, as a promotion for Kong Skull Island, there was Kong VR Destination Skull Island. This was a very fun VR experience that was way less of a game and more of a cinematic you could engage with. I had so much fun with this thing back in the day when it came out. Things exploded around the time of Godzilla vs. Kong as Toho and Legendary sought to increase Godzilla's global brand, leading to their licensing increasing like crazy. quickly. Godzilla started to appear in loads of games, including PUBG Mobile, World of Warships, and even Roblox. This was also the time of the MonsterVerse Empire DCX slot machine. While most of these crossovers were seen in mobile games, a few of them really made big impressions on me. Go Big was a rather fun experience that offered a sense of mindless entertainment and allowed you to smash up cities as your favorite titans. The Godzilla vs. Kong Pinball FX game saw lots of love from the fanbase, with wonderful level designs and exciting gameplay. Recently, Roblox saw a massive Godzilla x Kong crossover with loads of features. Legendary also launched Godzilla Kong Titan Chasers. While the game has yet to go fully global, it has had some early access playthrough. Unfortunately, it really doesn't appeal to me, but I really respect the game's attempts to tie into the extended lore of the universe with fun super species bios and more obscure monsters appearing. This does appear to be one of the larger budget apps and does have some potential for it. Arguably, the best of the game crossovers was Call of Duty Warzone Operation Monarch. This massive budget DLC for Warzone saw the MonsterVerse invade the Battle Royale, leading to fun Easter eggs, map locations, and Titan encounters. Godzilla and Kong both appeared in the game as enormous threats. This captured the sense of scale and majesty of the Titans seen in the early days of the MonsterVerse and led to fun moments of chaos as players engaged in a standard Battle Royale full of sweats who were way better than them and would just kill them over and over and over again. But this didn't take away from the fun concept of getting to battle it out while Godzilla and Kong were rampaging across the map. This was also where the very first Easter egg to Shimo was ever revealed, giving it a special place in MonsterVerse history. My favorite video game tie-in to the MonsterVerse other than the PS4 game happens to be Godzilla Battle Line. Over the years, many crossover events have been held with this game and the MonsterVerse. Now, players can enjoy Godzilla 2021, Kong 2021, Mechagodzilla 2021, King Ghidorah 2019, Mothra 2019, Evolved Godzilla, and Kong with the Beast Glove. The Godzilla x Kong crossover is currently happening right now, and each of these characters offers their own benefits and drawbacks that makes them really fun to use. Personally, right now I'm really loving the Beast Glove Kong, and I often use King Ghidorah 2019 as part of my main team. This is also the only game where you can have King Kong fight Godzilla, Gamera, Ultraman, Evangelion units, and even Kamen Rider. It's an addicting blast that's also endlessly frustrating, full of pay-to-win players, and sweats who win by hitting you with moves that you literally can't block or defend yourself against. Seriously, anybody who uses Absolute Zero to secure the victory deserves a special place in Scar King's kingdom. The MonsterVerse also has a few board game installments, mostly for Spanish players. The most important of these are the two tabletop RPG games, Kong Skull Island Cinematic Adventure and Kong Skull Island Isle of the Damned. I'm not sure who the market for these is or if anyone actually enjoys them, but they're not for me. The strangest thing about them is that they're marketed as being part of the canon to the universe. If anyone's been paying attention to the MonsterVerse as more than just a fan or mindless consumer, you'd know that this is just part of their buzzword marketing meant to sucker you into playing the games. These are not canon and do not matter to the universe at all. Almost certainly every single filmmaker ever involved with the MonsterVerse has never even heard of these and has no idea they even exist. How can they be canon when players get to make their own choices with different outcomes as they play? Isle of the Damned is a direct sequel to Kong Skull Island, taking place in the 1970s and sees Mason Weaver and James Conrad return to Skull Island as a covert mission with Monarch to learn all they can about the island. A US Army general named Ward is also headed to the island to kill Kong and avenge the Sky Devils. He leads a mercenary group to the island. After discovering a subterranean civilization beneath the island who worship a bat titan that very well might be Camazotz, you're forced to defend Kong and battle the mercenaries in a plot that is heavily repetitive of the film itself. The cinematic adventure game takes place in 2015 and sees Monarch teaming with Kong to survive a series of super species attacks and to engage in combat against a new titan, the Snare Hunter Queen, a giant ant with wings. The only non-canon MonsterVerse comic ever written is the Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong. This comic sees the Legion of Doom attack the Justice League in hopes of trapping them in the Phantom Zone. Their plan backfires and winds up sending the Legion to the MonsterVerse. Through an accidental twist of fate, the Toyman uses the Dreamstone to transport the Titans of the MonsterVerse into the DC universe. Trying to balance nature in a world he doesn't belong in, Godzilla goes to war with Superman. Meanwhile, the Bat family takes on Camazotz, Flash and Green Lantern battle Scylla, Behemoth fights Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl, and King Kong takes on the League of Assassins. Eventually, even Tiamat joins the action, taking on Atlantis. Things escalate into a full-blown war, with 4 different factions as Mechagodzilla is recreated and leads the Titans into battle against the heroes, King Kong is mind-controlled and used as a weapon, countless mechs are built for combat, and Godzilla rampages as a wild card trying to bring the chaos to an end. This comic is a super fun crossover adventure making use of both the best aspects of the MonsterVerse and the DC Comics universe. universe. It's a little bloated with too much going on and could have been simplified to emphasize the action between the heroes and the Titans, but it's still a super fun crossover and a wonderful read. The final form of MonsterVerse entertainment is books. To promote Godzilla vs. Kong, 2 children's books were written. Godzilla vs. Kong, Sometimes Friends Fight, but They Always Make Up, is an educational picture book that teaches kids how to be a good friend and how to count to 10. Written by Kate Jerome with cute artwork by Carol Herring, this is a good read for incredibly young kids. The next book was Kong and Me, written by Kiki Thorpe with illustrations by Nahid Chahani. This is a super charming tale of friendship between King Kong and Gia on Skull Island with cute Easter eggs and tributes to the films and a wonderful sense of adventure and rhythm. This is a great read for young kids with wonderful artwork. Lastly, there is the MonsterVerse novelizations. Their place in canon is highly debated amongst fans. Many consider the Godzilla 2014 and Kong Skull Islands to be non-canon as they were written by different people and based on earlier drafts of the final film scripts, leading to countless contradictions. On the other hand, the following novels were all written by Greg Keyes. The King of the Monsters novelization is by far my favorite of the bunch. Keyes makes a solid attempt to tie into the MonsterVerse's extended canon and make the universe truly cohesive. This is also the only novelization I truly consider canon, as it's the only one to have heavy involvement from the director of the associated film, and is the only one to be referenced by said director following the film's release. The only issue is its connections to Godzilla Awakening, which is no longer canon after the release of Monarch Legacy of Monsters. While the novelizations are fun and can help flesh out the lore of the universe for those of us who pretend they matter, they exist in an alternate version of the MonsterVerse that runs parallel to the films and ties into the comic material. The Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla x Kong novelizations are full of needless plot changes, lore retcons, and head-scratching decisions that weigh them down heavily. My respect for Keyes' attempts to solidify the lore of the universe and make it cohesive can't be understated, but his vision does offer contradictions to the films themselves and leads to other issues that I'm not a big fan of. In particular, I really dislike the Keyes portrayal of Godzilla. The novelizations and his comic tie-in, Godzilla Dominion, are where the idea of Godzilla being the living embodiment of nature's balance was born. In the 2014 film, Serizawa states that Godzilla will act as a power to restore nature's balance, but that wasn't his only function and didn't rob him of any authority or agency of his own. There was still lots of ambiguity as to what Godzilla's motives actually were, and his actions could be interpreted by viewers for themselves. The Keyes portrayal of Godzilla is as a mindless robot acting in service of nature. That's his only function, and he can do no wrong. The Alpha concept has been taken way too literally and made every Titan in the MonsterVerse other than Kong one-dimensional. They all must submit to Godzilla because he is the Alpha. What he says goes. It's everyone's job to submit. It's very boring and downright embarrassing. The concept of an Alpha doesn't actually exist in nature. I get that the films introduced this idea, but it's sad to see it leaned into way too heavily and intensely, rather than subtly shifted away from like it should have been. It's been taken so far that it comes across as furry fanfiction at this point, and the community has borderline fetishized this to justify Godzilla's actions in the films, no better seen than his interactions with Tiamat in The New Empire. Other than that, Keyes' stories are all pretty great. They expand the lore in mostly welcomed and creative ways, and make solid attempts to answer many of the bigger questions fans have after watching the films. It's unfortunate the fanbase had to start relying on them so heavily to do that heavy lifting the films should have done themselves, as the plots became increasingly nonsensical. And while I do enjoy the novelizations, it's hard to consider them as meaningful when the only filmmaker who acknowledged them was Michael Dougherty. I'm a huge fan of that version of the MonsterVerse as well, and would love to see it incorporated in the films in a more meaningful way, if that's the direction Legendary wants to take the books. Otherwise, I feel it should be clarified they are non-canon installments, or specifically a parallel MonsterVerse that runs alongside the comics but doesn't impact the films. The expanded MonsterVerse installments and crossover events are always a welcomed way to engage with the film series. While they may vary in quality depending on the installment, it's always great to get more of this version of Godzilla and King Kong, and to have outside fun with this universe. If you're a fan of the MonsterVerse, there's definitely things out there to keep you satisfied and coming back. Thank you so much for joining this bonus episode of MonsterVerse May, and thank you for sticking with this series to its conclusion. As we wrap MonsterVerse May up, I'd like to give my final thoughts. I think the MonsterVerse is an incredibly fun universe, and I'm very happy with it. There are definitely things I would do differently, and I do feel that the expanded material sometimes weighs the films down, but on the whole, I really love this universe, and I'm so glad to have it. As always, I would like to thank you all for watching another episode of MonsterVerse May. If you want to support this channel moving forward, please consider supporting the Patreon linked in the description below. I really appreciate all of the supporters I get on the Patreon, and that is the most direct way to support this channel and to make sure that I can continue to make videos like this for you. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all next time for the next one. D-Man, out.